Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Fiction Moon. In today's episode, we explore, what if Harry awakened as a shadow monarch at age 6 and raised every dead Potter as his eternal undead army? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The King Wakes. The village of Godric's Hollow was quiet the way graveyards are quiet, not peaceful, just empty of the things that make noise. It was Halloween, 1981, and the last living Potters were having the kind of ordinary evening that people only recognize as precious in hindsight. James was on the sofa with a Quidditch magazine he wasn't really reading. Lily was in the kitchen making tea she'd forget to drink. Harry was upstairs in his crib, not quite asleep, watching the shadows on the ceiling move. He was always watching the shadows. Lily had mentioned it to James once, how Harry never cried at night, never screamed or fussed the way their friends' babies did. He just lay there with those green eyes tracking something neither of them could see. James had laughed and said their son was probably plotting world domination. Lily had given him a look, and that had been the end of it. But Harry was watching something. He couldn't have explained it, not at 6 months, not at a year, not even now at 15 months. But the dark places in his room moved differently than the light places, and sometimes, just sometimes, he felt like they were watching back. The front door exploded inward at 10:30. Harry heard his father shout something, heard the crack and crash of furniture, heard a voice that wasn't James's saying words that didn't sound like words at all, more like the world was tearing itself slightly open to let the sound through. Then silence. Then footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps that didn't sound like anyone who belonged in this house. Lily's voice came through the floor, desperate and fierce. Not Harry. Take me, kill me instead, please. Another sound like the world tearing. Then the door to the nursery opened, and Lord Voldemort walked in. Harry looked at him. Voldemort was not what stories would later make him, not monstrous, not dramatic. He was tall and pale and red-eyed, and he looked at the child in the crib with the particular expression of a man who was being thorough. Harry looked back. And in that moment, in the space between Voldemort raising his wand and the first syllable of Avada leaving his lips, something shifted. The shadows in the room leaned in. Avada Kedavra. The green light crossed the room in less than a second. It hit Harry directly between the eyes. And then several things happened simultaneously, which was the only way something impossible could happen without anyone noticing too precisely which part was the impossible bit. The curse rebounded. Voldemort screamed, a sound that wasn't entirely human, and was simply gone, blown apart by his own reflected killing. The house began to groan and crack, Voldemort's remaining magic unraveling in violent bursts. A wall in the nursery blew outward. The ceiling cracked. The crib tipped sideways. Harry fell onto the nursery floor and lay there in the rubble and the silence. And the shadows came. They didn't look like anything, at first. Just the natural dark corners of a ruined room deepening, thickening, becoming purposeful. Harry lay on the floor with a lightning bolt cut on his forehead and his eyes wide open, and every shadow in Godric's Hollow turned and pointed at him like compass needles finding north. He didn't understand what was happening. He was 15 months old. He didn't understand almost anything. But there was a voice, not in his ears, not in his head exactly, more like underneath his thoughts, bedded in the floor of him, and the voice said something simple. Call them. Harry didn't know what that meant. The ones who fell for you. Call them back. And Harry, because he was 15 months old and had no reason not to trust the voice that lived at the bottom of him, did. He didn't do anything visible. Didn't raise his hand or speak a word. He just wanted, the way infants want things, totally, without reservation, without any concept of impossibility. He wanted his mother. He wanted his father. He wanted the warmth that had been in this house when he wasn't yet alone. The shadows answered. They came up from the ground and out of the walls and down from the ruined sky, black and silver and moving like smoke that had decided it had somewhere to be. They gathered at 2 points on the nursery floor and they built, not flesh, not exactly, but something that wore the shape of flesh so convincingly that the difference didn't matter much. James Potter stood up first. He looked down at his hands. Then at the ruined nursery. Then at Harry on the floor. His expression moved through shock and confusion and grief so fast that they blurred together into something quieter and more permanent. "Harry," he said. His voice was not quite right, deeper, with a resonance underneath it that hadn't been there before, but it was James, completely and unmistakably James. Lily came up beside him. She was already looking at Harry. She crossed the distance between them and knelt and picked him up and held him, and Harry gripped her robes and buried his face in her neck, and the shadows around them pulsed warmly. "What happened?" James said. He was looking at the room, the wreckage, the blown-out wall. "He came," Lily said. Her voice was very level. "Voldemort. She stopped. Started again. He killed you first. Then me. Then he tried to kill Harry. Tried." The curse rebounded. James was quiet for a moment. "The sacrificial protection. Your sacrifice for Harry." He paused. Are we, dead?" Lily said simply. She didn't say it like it was a tragedy. She said it the way you say yes when someone asks if it's raining, a fact, unpleasant, but worth being clear about. "But Harry called us back." Both of them looked at the infant in Lily's arms. Harry looked back at them with those green eyes that tracked things neither of them could see, except now James was beginning to think that maybe his son could see quite a lot more than any of them had ever imagined. "What is he?" James asked quietly. Lily pressed her lips to Harry's forehead, careful of the cut there. "He's our son," she said. "Whatever else he is, he's our son first." The house creaked around them. Outside, Godric's Hollow was waking up, lights in windows, voices, someone was going to come soon, someone was going to find this. James seemed to recognize it at the same moment Lily did, because his expression changed into something more practical. "He can't be found here," James said. "Not like this." "No." Lily was already thinking, Harry could feel it, she didn't move differently but something about her sharpened, the way a candle flame sharpens when there's wind. "Dumbledore will come. And if Dumbledore comes first, he'll control the situation," James said. His tone made it clear what he thought of that. Harry needs to be with someone before Dumbledore can decide where he goes. Lily's arms tightened slightly around Harry. "But we can't be seen. Not like this." The shadows shifted around them, and Harry, without knowing he was doing it, answered. They could move through shadow. He understood that the way he understood his own hands, not consciously, just completely. The dark places connected to other dark places, and if you were made of shadow, you could step from one to another. But where should they go? And Harry, at the bottom of him, felt more. Other dead Potters. Not just his parents, others, further back, faded and distant like voices through water. He reached for them the way he'd reached for James and Lily, and the shadows answered deeper. They came slower this time. More reluctant, not resistant, just far. 2 of them. The man was broad-shouldered with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of face that had laughed a great deal and fought a great deal in roughly equal measure. He stood up with the immediate situational awareness of someone who had spent a career in dangerous places. The woman was elegant and sharp-eyed, with Doria Black's distinctive features, high cheekbones and dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing, wearing the particular expression of someone who has already assessed a situation before anyone else has noticed there is a situation. Charles Potter looked at James. Then at Lily. Then at Harry in Lily's arms. "Of course," he said. Not unhappily. Just, inevitably, the way you say of course when the thing you always suspected turns out to be true. Doria Potter took one look at her grandson and said, quite distinctly, "Shadow Sovereign. I thought that bloodline was extinct." She looked at Charles. Your mother's side. My grandmother Ignotus, Charles said slowly. She always said there was something in the Potter blood that went back further than the family tree showed. Ignotus Peverell, Doria said. Master of the Deathly Hallows. Which means, she looked at Harry again, and her expression was not fear, exactly. It was the look of someone realizing they have been standing next to something vast without knowing it. He isn't just a survivor. He's the heir of death itself. Harry didn't understand any of this. But he looked at Charles and Doria with those clear green eyes, and Charles, who had faced dark wizards and creatures and 3 separate wars without flinching, felt something settle in his chest like a general who has finally found the commander he was meant to serve. He went down on one knee. It surprised even him. He hadn't decided to do it. He just did. Well, James said, staring at his father kneeling in the rubble of a destroyed nursery. Doria, with perfect composure, knelt beside her husband. Lily was watching Harry's face. Harry's face was doing something unusual, not a baby's expression at all. Something older. Something that knew, even without language for it, what this meant. We need to move, Lily said softly. Now. Before someone comes. They moved through shadow, stepped out of the ruined house and across the dark places of Godric's Hollow and out again somewhere entirely else, somewhere quiet and temporary and safe enough for this one night. They could not stay together in the open. The shadows understood this too. James and Lily and Charles and Doria, they were bound to Harry now, sovereign and shadows, king and eternal court, and the distance between them could stretch but never truly break. But for tonight, they were together, in the dark, and it was enough. Petunia Dursley opened her front door on the morning of November the 1st and found a baby on the doorstep. This was not, on its face, a surprise. Petunia had known something like this might come. Dumbledore's letter was under the basket, explaining everything in the measured, reasonable tones of someone who was absolutely certain they were right, and she had steeled herself for it. She was a practical woman. Practical women handled things. What she had not expected, what nothing in Dumbledore's letter had prepared her for, was the feeling that came with the child. She picked up the basket, and the moment she touched it, she felt it. Not cold, not warm, deep. Like looking down a staircase in the dark and knowing it goes further than stairs have any right to go. She looked at the baby and the baby looked back at her, and Petunia Dursley, who had never been magical a day in her life, felt, for one terrible clear second, exactly how small she was. She took him inside. What else could she do? Harry was not a difficult child, which was somehow worse. He didn't cry much. He ate what he was given without complaint. He didn't break things or throw tantrums or demand entertainment. He sat where he was put and watched things with those eyes that Vernon had, quite early on, decided he didn't like. There's something wrong with that child, Vernon said, on the evening of Harry's 2nd birthday. He kept his voice low, the boy was in the next room, and felt faintly ridiculous for keeping his voice low, because it was a toddler, but... The eyes. He's fine, Petunia said. Her voice had the flatness of a woman who has made a decision and is committed to not revisiting it. He stares, Petunia. Children stare. Not like that. Dudley stared at things too, but Dudley stared with the frank appetitive directness of a healthy, comfortable 2-year-old who wanted things and knew how to get them. Harry's staring was different. Harry's staring was evaluative. Like he was running numbers on you. Like he was filing you into a category you hadn't been consulted about. What Vernon didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that when Harry stared at empty corners of the room, he was having conversations. They worked out the communication over the first few months. Harry couldn't speak yet, and James and Lily couldn't move things in the living world. They existed in the space between shadow and substance, visible to Harry, invisible to everyone else. But they could communicate. Lily figured it out first. If she concentrated, she could push impressions rather than words. Images. Feelings. And Harry could push back. By the time Harry was 2, they had a complete if wordless language. By the time he was 3 and actually talking, they were having real conversations, quiet and continuous, the ongoing dialogue of a child who had been given back the parents he should never have lost. Don't antagonize the large one, James advised, watching Vernon from the shadow space with the expression of a man who wants very much to do something and is restraining himself. Vernon had just given Harry the smaller portion at dinner again. He did it consistently, reflexively, without apparent awareness that he was doing it. Not yet. Harry, at 3, understood not yet the way children understand things adults think are too complex for them, completely and without surprise. Why not yet? He asked, very quietly, in the dark of the cupboard under the stairs that had become his room. Petunia had put him there with the expression of someone forcing themselves not to think about what they were doing. Harry had moved in with the expression of someone making a tactical assessment of available territory. Because we don't know enough yet, Lily said. She was sitting across from him in the dark, and in the shadow space she was solid and real and warm, the way he remembered her without having any memory to draw on. About your power. About what you can do. About the wizarding world. Dumbledore, Harry said. Both his parents went slightly still. The letter, Harry said. The one Aunt Petunia has in her room in the box with the blue flowers on it. I read it. He paused. Most of it. Some words were hard. James and Lily exchanged a look over his head. The look had several layers to it, including he can read at 3 and he broke into Petunia's room and he's already researching the wizard who controls his fate, and underneath all of that, something that wasn't quite pride but was adjacent to it. What did the letter say? Lily asked. That I have to live here because of protection. Blood protection. Because you're her sister. Harry looked at Lily directly. Is that real? Yes, Lily said. My sacrifice, when I died protecting you, it created a protection. As long as you call this place home, the protection holds. Against Voldemort. Harry considered this. But not against other things. No, Lily said. Not against other things. Then the protection is Dumbledore's reason, Harry said, not the real reason. Another look between his parents. James covered his mouth with his hand, which was the face he made when he was impressed and didn't want Harry to know yet. What do you mean? Lily asked carefully. If Dumbledore put me here, he can come get me whenever he wants. The protection works on Voldemort but Dumbledore isn't Voldemort. Harry tilted his head. He put me here so he knows where I am. So he can find me when he wants me. So nobody else can get to me first. There was a long quiet. He's 6 months old in terms of conversation, James said to Lily, and he's already threat-modeling Albus Dumbledore. He's our son, Lily said, with an expression that defied interpretation. Charles ran the training. He'd been an Auror commander in his time, and the habits of command had not left him even in death. If anything, they had clarified. He had no needs of his own anymore, no fatigue, no distraction. He had only Harry. He started when Harry was 4. The shadow space first, learning to move in it, to see through it, to understand its architecture. The shadows were not simply darkness, they were a domain, and Harry was its sovereign. Every shadow in the world was, in some small sense, his. He could feel through them, speak through them, move through them. And most importantly, he could strengthen them, collapse them, weaponize them. By the time Harry was 5, he could step through shadows as easily as stepping through a door. He could reach into a shadow across the room and make it solid, thick as stone or sharp as glass. He could communicate through shadows the way a spider feels its web, any disturbance, anywhere in his domain, he could sense. Good, Charles said, watching Harry practice in the backyard while the Dursleys were out. Again. Harry dissolved and reappeared 10 feet away in a heartbeat. He wasn't moving through space, he was leaving one shadow and entering another. The difference looked trivial and was in practice enormous. Grandfather, Harry said. He called them by their titles, grandfather, grandmother, mum, dad, with a matter-of-fact warmth that suggested he had decided early that his family was his and was not prepared to feel complicated about it. I need to raise more. Charles looked at him steadily. More Eternals. There are more Potters, Harry said. I can feel them. Further back. There's a lot of them. Raising an Eternal isn't like calling us, Charles said carefully. Your parents, your grandmother, and I, we were recent. Ourselves were still whole. Older souls are different, Harry said. He'd already tried twice, reaching into the deeper dark for the ones he could feel at the edges. Both times he'd pulled back something partial, not a person, just an outline. They don't hold the same way. They can, Doria said. She'd been in the garden behind him, which startled absolutely no one since Doria was always somewhere she hadn't visibly arrived at. But you need to understand who you're raising before you raise them. A soul without a self is just energy. You need to know them well enough to anchor them. Then tell me about them, Harry said, turning to her with that direct green gaze that made even his grandmother feel, occasionally, that she was the one being studied. Doria sat down on the garden wall with the ease of someone who has completely forgotten that walls are not furniture, and began to teach him the history of House Potter. She knew it all. The line ran back further than most wizarding families admitted their lines went, back through the Peverells, back through Ignotus, back through connections to the oldest schools of magic on the continent. The Potters had always been something. They had always produced something exceptional in every generation, not always recognized, not always honored, but there. Waiting. Ignotus Peverell, Harry said at one point, interrupting her with the absolute lack of self-consciousness of a child who has decided information is more important than manners. The one with the Hallows. Could you raise him? Doria paused. Considered this for a noticeably longer time than she usually took before answering. Perhaps, she said finally. But I'd wait. Why? Because, Doria said, meeting his eyes, you haven't fully grown into what you are yet. And summoning the man who made a deal with death itself before you found your footing would be, she chose her word carefully, ambitious. Harry accepted this. He filed it. He would come back to it. By age 6, he had 14 Eternals. He'd done it methodically, Doria's research, her oral histories, her knowledge of the family's dead, and then Harry reaching carefully into the older dark and pulling them through one by one, each time understanding the soul better before he called. Some of them were clearer than others. An aura from 3 generations back named Fleamont Potter, calm, warm, devastatingly competent with a wand, had come through almost as crisply as James. A woman named Euphemia, his great-grandmother, who had been a healer and whose knowledge of magical medicine was encyclopedic, came through still carrying her clinical precision like a carried lantern. Further back, a duelist named Pericles Potter who had won 17 formal challenges and one very informal one, and who upon becoming an Eternal had spent approximately 4 minutes assessing the situation before declaring that he served the Monarch and asking when practice began. A scholar named Aldrich Potter who had written 3 foundational texts on ancient magic and arrived into eternity with the energy of someone who had a lot of notes to take. 14 souls. 14 Eternals. Each one different, each one complete, each one Harry's without question or conflict. The Dursleys had no idea. Oh, they knew something was happening. You couldn't have 14 dead people moving through the shadows of your house without some atmospheric consequence. The house was cold in ways that couldn't be explained by drafts, and there were moments when Vernon would reach for a light switch and feel, just briefly, like the dark was the natural state and the light was the interruption. Dudley had stopped throwing things at Harry by the time he was 4, something about the way Harry looked when things were thrown at him, not afraid, not even angry, just measuring, had gotten through even to Dudley, who was not particularly sensitive but was not an idiot either. He told me to stop, Dudley told his mother once, when she pressed him. He was 5 and had the vocabulary of a 5-year-old, which was not sufficient for what he was trying to convey. He didn't say anything but he told me to stop. Petunia looked at the small boy sitting across the kitchen table eating his toast in a careful, efficient way. He ate everything and felt the bottom of the stairs feeling again deep. She had learned not to look at it directly. Vernon put a lock on Harry's cupboard. Harry waited 3 days and then the lock simply wasn't there anymore, and Vernon couldn't explain where it had gone and didn't ask, because asking would have required acknowledging something he was committed to not acknowledging. Harry, for his part, did not resent the Dursleys. He didn't like them. He had no particular interest in them. They were an environment he was moving through, and he moved through it with the same steady patience he applied to everything, collecting information, building capacity, waiting for the time when waiting would end. "You should have a friend," James said one evening, sitting on the edge of Harry's cot in the cupboard. The shadows in the small space were warm and silver-edged, the particular atmosphere of the shadow domain leaking gently through. Harry looked up from the book he was reading, one of Aldrich's recommended texts on theoretical magic, which Harry had found in the back of a jumble sale 2 streets over with the particular satisfaction of someone who had been looking for exactly that thing. "I have 14 friends. Living friends," James said. Harry considered this with the same attention he gave everything. They wouldn't understand. They don't need to understand everything. They'd tell someone. Children tell. Not all of them. James rested his chin on his hand, looking at his son with an expression that was complicated in ways Harry wouldn't fully parse until he was older. "I had friends at school who knew things about me that weren't straightforward. And they kept those things. Because they were my friends. Not because they understood everything, but because they understood me." Harry thought about this for a long time. Long enough that the evening moved to night and the house went quiet around them. "At school," he said finally. "My school. There's a boy who eats lunch alone because he reads during the lunch hour and people think that means he doesn't want company." "Does he?" "I think he'd like company. He just doesn't know how to start." James smiled, the real one, the one that had nothing calculated in it. "Well," he said. "You know how to start." Harry closed his book. "I'll think about it," he said, which from Harry meant yes in approximately 3 to 5 days. The boy's name was Marcus Webb and he liked dinosaurs and maps and was the only child in their primary school class who had read all the way through a book about ancient Rome, cover to cover, twice. Harry sat down across from him at lunch on a Wednesday and said, without preamble, the Romans had shadow puppetry as a religious practice. "Did you read that part?" Marcus looked up. That's not in the book." "Not in that book," Harry said. "There's a better one." They ate lunch together for the rest of the year. Harry didn't tell him about the shadows. But James had been right, it was good. It was quietly, specifically good to have a person his own age to eat lunch with and argue about ancient civilizations. Marcus thought Harry was strange, in the way that strange can be a feature rather than a problem, and Harry thought Marcus was one of the only people at school who was actually thinking about things, and that was enough. Harry was 6, and his army was 14 strong, and somewhere across the wizarding world, the people who were monitoring the boy who lived were filing reports that said quiet, unremarkable, apparently normal, and Dumbledore was reading those reports with the particular relief of a man whose plan is working. He would have been less relieved if he could see what lived in the shadows of number 4, Privet Drive. Charles called him to the large shadow in the back corner of the garden, the one cast by the old oak tree, which Harry had made into something like a practice hall in the shadow space, a whole room carved from connected darkness where they could work without the physical world intruding. "Ready?" Charles said. Harry rolled his shoulders. "Go." Charles came at him with a shadow spear, a weapon Harry had learned to manifest from concentrated darkness, long as a lance and harder than iron when it was focused correctly. Charles could use them too, as an eternal drawing on Harry's power. He drove it forward with the force of a trained auror who had been practicing with weapons since before Harry's parents were born. Harry wasn't there. He blinked through shadow, sideways, 2 feet, and the spear passed through where he'd been. He came up behind Charles and pressed 2 fingers to the back of his grandfather's neck where a vulnerability existed if you knew the shadow anatomy of an eternal, and Charles, who had taught Harry about that vulnerability himself, 3 months ago, went still. "Good," Charles said. Not with the restraint of someone who's barely impressed. With the satisfaction of someone who has trained something exceptional and is watching it become what it was meant to be. Harry stepped back. His hair was messed up and he was breathing slightly harder than usual, and there was a thin cut on his forearm from the spear's edge where it had barely caught him, which he'd fix with Euphemia's shadow healing technique later. "Again," he said. Charles smiled, turned, and came again. They went for 2 more hours. In the house, Petunia was watching television. Dudley was playing with his toys. Vernon was reading the paper. None of them noticed that the shadow under the oak tree was a doorway to a realm where the dead trained the living to be something the world didn't have a name for yet. By the time they finished, Harry was sweating and grinning and every shadow in the garden was vibrating with spent energy. He looked, for those few minutes after training, like what he actually was, a 6-year-old boy who had been running and fighting and pushing himself, alive and breathing and messy-haired and happy in the specific way that people are happy when they are exactly where they're supposed to be. He stood in the garden as the oak's shadow stretched long in the evening light. He could feel them all, his Eternals, all 14, distributed through the shadow network. James was in the living room shadows, listening to Vernon complain about the news with an expression James periodically described to Harry as, "the face I make when I'm being very mature." Lily was in Harry's cupboard, probably rereading something she'd already read. Charles was beside him, cooling down in the way the dead cool down, not breathing harder, just settling back into the ambient dark. Doria was somewhere in the neighborhood doing whatever Doria did when she wasn't visibly advising someone. "Grandfather," Harry said. There's something at the end of the shadow line. Very far down. Something that's been there a while." He'd felt it for weeks. Not a soul, not a Potter soul, not any soul exactly. More like a lock. A sealed door. In the deepest part of the shadow domain, beyond even where the oldest of his Eternals had come from. "Do you know what it is?" Charles was quiet for a moment. "I have a theory." "Tell me." "The Hallows," Charles said. "The 3 deathly Hallows. They belong to the heir of death. They've always been connected to your bloodline, but the connection was dormant while the sovereigns were. If you've woken up." He trailed off. "They're not dormant anymore," Harry said. "No. I'd imagine they're not." Harry looked at the oak tree's shadow. At the door at the bottom of it that he hadn't opened yet. "Not yet," he said, using his father's phrase, his own phrase, the phrase his family used when the timing wasn't right and patience was the sharper weapon. "Not yet," Charles agreed. The garden went dark around them, the sun finally gone, and the shadows rose up warm and full and every inch of them, every corner and depth, all the way to that sealed door at the bottom of everything. Harry went inside, washed his hands, ate his dinner, and went to bed in his cupboard. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Nothing to see. Just a house on a street with a small boy in it, ordinary as anything. In the dark, behind the door at the bottom of the shadow world, something enormous waited. It had, after all, been waiting for a very long time. Chapter 2, The Army Grows. The summer Harry turned 7, he dismantled Vernon Dursley's sense of control so quietly and completely that Vernon never quite identified the moment it happened. It started with the cupboard. Vernon had reinstalled the lock 3 times by Harry's 7th birthday. Each time, it disappeared within a week. Not broken, not forced or damaged, simply gone, the screws still in the wood, the bracket still mounted, the lock itself just absent, the way a word sometimes leaves your head mid-sentence. Vernon had tried a padlock on the 4th attempt. That lasted 2 days. He'd stood in the hallway looking at the bare wood of the cupboard door and made a sound that wasn't quite any recognizable word, and Petunia had appeared from the kitchen and looked at the door and then looked at her husband and said, very quietly, "Leave it, Vernon." He had. He never tried a 5th time. What Vernon didn't know was that Harry had been putting the locks in the shadow space, in a corner he privately thought of as the junk drawer, a small dark pocket between dimensions where he stored things that needed to not exist for a while. It was one of the first practical applications he'd found for the Sovereign's ability to fold shadow around physical objects. Aldrich had theorized about it in one of his texts but never confirmed it personally. Harry had confirmed it when he was 6.5, and had been pleased in the specific way that theoretical knowledge becoming practical knowledge is always pleasing. You could have just broken them, James pointed out, the morning after the padlock disappeared. That would have told him what happened to them, Harry said. He was eating breakfast, the smaller portion, as always, with the focused efficiency of someone refueling rather than enjoying. This way he thinks he's going mad. James looked at his son for a moment. You're 7. Yes. Just, noting that. Noted. Lily, from the shadow of the kitchen doorframe, made a sound that was almost certainly a laugh converted at the last moment into something more ambiguous. School started again in September, and Harry went with the settled patience of someone doing something necessary rather than someone doing something they particularly wanted to be doing. Primary school had its uses. There were books, and occasionally a teacher who was actually interested in the thing they were teaching, and Marcus Webb, who had spent the summer reading everything he could find about ancient Egypt and was ready to begin a lengthy comparative analysis of Egyptian and Mesopotamian record-keeping systems, which Harry engaged with fully because Aldrich had extensive thoughts on the relationship between ancient record-keeping and early magical codification, and the conversation turned out to be more interesting than either of them had expected. What primary school did not have was anything that could meaningfully challenge Harry, which he accepted as a feature of being 7 and managed by doing the work at whatever speed the class required and spending the remaining mental space on other problems. The most current other problem was the Potters who were still beyond his reach. He could feel 6 of them, 6 souls at the deep end of the shadow line, further back than anyone he'd raised so far, older and quieter and more diffuse. They had the shape of people but not the clarity. Like photographs faded to almost nothing. He'd tried twice more in the past year, careful and controlled, the way Doria had taught him, understanding the soul first, anchoring the self before drawing them through. Both times he'd gotten fragments, impressions of personality, flashes of memory, enough to know who but not quite enough to pull them completely through. You need a focal point, Doria said. They were in the shadow hall under the oak tree, which Harry had expanded considerably over the past year. It was a full room now, or what the Shadow Domain's version of a room was, which had walls that moved like deep water and a floor that was solid enough to stand on if you didn't think too hard about what it was made of. Doria sat opposite him with the posture of someone who has never in her life been physically uncomfortable and doesn't intend to start now. For recent souls, your lineage connection is enough. For old ones, you need something physical. Something that was theirs. How physical? Bone is best, she said, without any particular drama about it. Personal objects work. Something they made or carried. The more intimate the object's relationship to the soul, the better the anchor. Harry thought about this. The Potter family vault. Doria inclined her head slightly. I would assume so. Which I can't access until I'm 11. According to Gringotts standard inheritance protocols, yes. She paused. Unless you can demonstrate legal majority through another mechanism. What mechanisms? Doria's expression was the one she wore when she was about to say something that was technically legal but that the people who wrote the laws hadn't quite intended. A hereditary lordship. House Potter is an ancient and noble house. The lordship passes at 17, or at any age, if there is no living adult of the line to hold it. She let that settle. You are the only living Potter. So I already hold the lordship, Harry said slowly. Technically. Since the night your father died, yes. Practically, it would require you to claim it formally at Gringotts. Which would require you to be at Gringotts. And no one has taken you to Gringotts. Which I suspect is deliberate. Harry said nothing for a moment. Then, Dumbledore manages my estate. He has a temporary administrative designation from the Wisengamot, which exists because you haven't claimed your lordship. If you claimed it, his designation would dissolve. The shadow hall was very quiet. The walls moved their slow liquid movement, and somewhere in the deep dark the sealed door sat at the bottom of everything and waited. "We're going to need to go to Diagon Alley," Harry said. "Yes," said Doria. "We are. I'm 7. Yes. How does a 7-year-old get to Diagon Alley unescorted?" Doria's expression moved into something that was almost a smile. "Unescorted is relative," she said, "when one has an army." The plan took 4 months to develop and 3 days to execute. The development phase was mostly research, Doria's knowledge of wizarding law cross-referenced with Aldrich's texts on institutional structures, filtered through Charles's practical understanding of how things actually worked versus how they were supposed to work, supplemented by Fleamont's knowledge of the Potter estate. He'd managed much of it before his death and retained the administrative details with the precise recall of someone who'd always been better with numbers than with drama. Harry absorbed all of it with the same focused attention he gave everything and built a picture of what he was walking into. Gringotts. The Potter Vault. The Lordship Claim. The cascade of legal effects that would follow, Dumbledore's administrative designation dissolving, Harry's status changing from ward to minor lord, his access to the estate opening fully. The execution phase was simpler. Petunia's sister Mrs. Fig, who watched Harry when the Dursleys went places Harry wasn't brought along, had a habit of falling asleep in front of afternoon television around 2 o'clock. Harry walked out of her house on a Saturday in February while she was asleep, turned left instead of right, and was 2 streets away before anyone might have noticed. He traveled by shadow. Not continuously, he was 7 and the longer jumps tired him, and traveling through the shadow domain in a way that emerged somewhere specific required precise knowledge of the shadows at the destination. But London was full of shadows, connected and overlapping, and Harry had been extending his awareness through the city's shadow network for months, mapping it the way you map territory before you move through it. He knew exactly which shadow in Charing Cross Road connected to which alley, and which alley had a brick wall with just enough shadow at its base to step through into Diagon Alley proper. He emerged into a January cold Wizarding Street and stood for a moment just taking it in. It was the first time he'd seen it, this world that was half his by blood and entirely his by right. The crooked buildings, the robes, the owls and cauldrons and shop windows full of things that glowed for reasons that weren't electricity. He catalogued it quickly and efficiently and noted for later examination the deep resonance of magic here. It sang against his shadow senses, thick and old and layered, and underneath it all the familiar dark pulse of death's domain running through everything like groundwater. He walked to Gringotts. The goblins looked at him when he came through the doors, and Harry looked back, and there was a brief moment that several of the Gringotts staff would later describe to each other as notable. "I'm here to claim the lordship of House Potter," Harry said to the teller. His voice was completely level. He was 7 years old and approximately 4 feet tall. "My name is Harry James Potter. I'm the last living member of the line." The goblin teller, Ragnarok, according to the nameplate, looked at him for a long moment with the evaluative blankness of a species that has learned not to show surprise because showing surprise is a disadvantage. "Identification," he said. "Harry Potter," said another voice, a senior goblin who had appeared from somewhere to Harry's left with the efficiency of someone who moves quickly when something interesting is happening. His nameplate said Director Sharpclaw. "Come with me, please." Harry followed him to a private office, which was the kind of room that communicated importance through the quality of the furniture and the depth of the quiet. Sharpclaw sat across from him and looked at him with eyes that were considerably more acute than they appeared. "This is irregular," Sharpclaw said. "The law is clear," Harry said. "Ancient and noble house. No adult of the line. Lordship passes immediately to the eldest remaining heir regardless of age. The Wisengamot has designated an administrative steward, who serves at the pleasure of the rightful lord. Which is me." Harry paused. "I'd like to see my vault records." Sharpclaw studied him. "You've done your research." "I try to. Another pause. Then something moved in the goblin's expression, not warmth, not quite, but the particular quality of genuine respect, which is what goblins feel instead. Blood confirmation, Sharpclaw said, producing a parchment and a small silver implement. Standard procedure. A drop will do. Harry didn't hesitate. He pressed his thumb to the implement, let the drop fall to the parchment, and watched it spread in the golden lines of a family tree that went back further than most wizarding families would have been comfortable acknowledging. Sharpclaw looked at the parchment for a long time. Lord Potter, he said finally, and the title settled in the air of the office like a stone settling in deep water. Welcome to Gringotts. The records took 2 hours. Fleamont had prepared him for most of it, but seeing the actual numbers was different from hearing about them. The Potter estate was considerable. 3 vaults, the family vault, oldest and deepest, containing the accumulated wealth and artifacts of 12 generations, the trust vault, set up for Harry's personal use, and a 3rd vault Harry hadn't known about, sealed under what Gringotts records called Sovereign Lock, which apparently meant it could only be opened by a Shadow Monarch and hadn't been opened since. Harry looked at the date, 1312. What's in the Sovereign Vault? Harry asked. Unknown, Sharpclaw said. Our records indicate it was sealed by a member of your line who held the same, particular designation, that you appear to hold. The contents were not disclosed. I'd like to open it. Today. Is there a reason not to? Sharpclaw almost smiled. No, he said. There is not. The cart ride down was the longest Harry had ever taken, and he'd taken it only in imagination before this. They went past the regular vaults, past the deeper ones, past levels where the temperature dropped and the magic in the walls thickened to something almost textural, and finally to a door that was not like the other vault doors. It was black iron carved with symbols that Harry didn't recognize consciously but that his shadow senses knew immediately, the way your hands know a familiar weight before your eyes process it. He pressed his palm to the door. The symbols lit up silver. The door opened. Inside was not treasure in the conventional sense, though there was gold, more gold than Harry could immediately assess. What there was, arranged on shelves carved from shadow stone, was an archive. Texts. Objects. Things that had been gathered over centuries by every Shadow Monarch the Potter line had produced, which was apparently more than just him, though the others had apparently never woken fully, never reached the capacity Harry had, never built a court, never raised their dead in numbers. Brief half-awakenings, Doria called them. Sparks that hadn't caught. Harry's had caught. On the central shelf, under a glass case that dissolved at his touch, were 3 objects. A wand. Or not quite a wand, longer than a standard wand, black as the vault door, with an inlaid pattern that seemed to move when he looked at it directly. Not looking at it directly, it was perfectly still. A stone. Gray and unremarkable except for the way the light in the vault was slightly wrong around it, bent inward, as if the stone were a very small drain for light. A cloak. Folded precisely, and even folded it seemed to contain a quality of invisibility, not translucence, not thinness, but a fundamental refusal to be entirely seen. Harry stood and looked at the 3 objects for a long time. The Deathly Hallows, Doria had said. They belong to the heir of death. He picked up the cloak first. It fell open in his hands like water, weightless and cold and somehow quiet. Wearing it was like being wrapped in silence. He put it back. He picked up the stone and held it, and felt the shadow domain shift underneath him, deepen, the sealed door at the bottom of it straining very slightly as if something on the other side had noticed. He put it back too, carefully. He looked at the wand for a long time. The Elder Wand, Sharpclaw said from behind him, his voice carefully neutral. According to the vault records. I know what it is, Harry said. He picked it up. The shadow domain surged. Not out of control, not chaotic, but enormous, a wave of presence that expanded outward through every shadow in London simultaneously, a pulse that every magical creature in the city felt as a brief vertiginous moment of something shifted, like standing on a ship when a large wave passes underneath. Harry held the wand and breathed, and the surge settled back into him, enormous and quiet, like water receding. "Right," he said. His voice was perfectly steady. "I'll be keeping this." He took all 3 hallows. He took them in his shadow space where they'd be inaccessible to anyone who didn't know about his shadow space, which was everyone except his Eternals, and he walked back up through the levels of Gringotts and sat back down in Sharpclaw's office and completed the formal lordship claim, which involved signing 17 documents and pressing his lordship ring, a black and gold band from the family vault that fit his finger as if it had been waiting, to 11 of them. Dumbledore's administrative designation was formally dissolved at 3:47 in the afternoon. Harry was back in Mrs. Figg's house, sitting on her sofa watching her still sleeping form, before 4 o'clock. She woke up at 4:15 and offered him a biscuit and asked if he'd had a nice afternoon, and Harry said yes and ate the biscuit, and that was that. Dumbledore felt it. He was in his office at Hogwarts when the Gringotts notification arrived, a formal parchment with the goblin seal, informing him that his administrative designation over the Potter estate had been dissolved due to the formal lordship claim of Lord Harrison James Potter, aged 7 years, 3 months. He read it 3 times. Then he set it on his desk and sat very still for a while, which was unusual for Albus Dumbledore, who was generally a man of movement and expression and elaborate gesture. The stillness was the sign that something had genuinely surprised him, and very few things genuinely surprised him. He had not planned for this. The protection, he thought. The blood protection still held, the boy was still at Privet Drive, presumably, the claim had been made but the residence hadn't changed. So the protection was intact. That was the important thing. But a 7-year-old had traveled, unescorted, to Diagon Alley, accessed Gringotts, claimed a hereditary lordship, dissolved a Wisingamot designation, and apparently accessed a sealed vault that Gringotts records showed as a sovereign lock, which was a classification Dumbledore had seen in the archives and had assumed was defunct, a historical curiosity belonging to a line of power that hadn't manifested in centuries. He sent an owl to his contact at Gringotts. The response that came back 2 hours later was polite and professional and told him, in the careful language of an institution that was not afraid of him, absolutely nothing he didn't already know, because Goblin financial confidentiality was the one wall in the wizarding world that Albus Dumbledore had never found a door through. He went to his pensieve and stood over it for a long time, not adding any memories, just thinking. The boy was 7. What was a 7-year-old boy doing with access to a sovereign lock vault? What did a sovereign lock vault even contain? He thought about Sybil Trelawney's prophecy, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, and then he thought about the specific shape of the power the prophecy described, which was love, which was sacrifice, which was the power of a human life given willingly for another. He thought about those things, and then he thought about a sovereign lock vault sitting in the depths of Gringotts, opened for the first time in over 600 years by a 7-year-old boy, and he felt something he was not accustomed to feeling. Uncertain. Harry spent the rest of that year practicing with the Elder Wand. Not spellcasting, not yet, he had no formal training and didn't want to develop bad habits before he had good foundations, but simply attunement. Understanding the relationship between the wand and the shadow domain, between the Master of Death's power and the Sovereign's power, how they layered and amplified each other. They were different expressions of the same deep thing, the authority over what lay beyond life. The wand made the shadows stronger. Not in a brute force way but in a precision way, it was like the difference between shouting into a room and speaking directly into someone's ear. The same intention, vastly more effective. Charles watched him work one afternoon and said, "Your great-great-grandmother Ignotus. You can reach her now." Harry looked up from the practice sequence he'd been running. "You think so? You have the wand. You know the history. The Hallows are what created the sovereign ability in the first place. Well, Ignotus's encounter with death and the Hallows did. The wand is a direct connection to that original moment." Charles paused. "It's not guaranteed. Souls that far back are, faint. But you have more anchor than you've ever had. Harry sat with that for a day. The following evening, in the Shadow Hall, he reached further than he ever had. Past the 14 Eternals. Past the diffuse shapes of the 6 he'd almost reached before. Past the sealed door, which he wasn't touching yet, not yet. Into the very deep dark, into the place where the oldest memories of the bloodline lived like fossils in stone. He felt her. Ignotus Peverell. Not Potter yet, the line ran the other way, Potter descending from Peverell through a female line, the name changed but the blood carrying the sovereign gift down through centuries like a sealed letter passing through a long chain of messengers who never opened it. She was ancient and deep and very, very quiet. Harry held the elder wand and spoke her name, not aloud, in the shadow language, the language of the domain, and the deep dark listened. She came slowly. Not like his parents, not like Charles, not with the abruptness of recent dead who still have momentum from their living selves. She came the way stars come out, gradually, apparently from nowhere, suddenly there when you finally see them properly. She was tall. That was the first impression. Tall and white-haired and with eyes that were the grey of very old stones, and she stood in the Shadow Hall and looked at Harry and her expression was one of recognition so profound it bordered on relief. At last, she said. Her voice had the resonance of the very deep shadows, layered and slightly echoing, as if she existed in multiple layers of time simultaneously. The line woke. I had wondered. How long have you been waiting? Harry asked. She considered this. Long. A pause. It doesn't feel long. Time in the deep is slow. But long. Harry looked at her steadily. I'm your heir. Many times removed. Yes. You made a deal with death. Yes. Her expression was complicated in ways that transcended his 7-year-old vocabulary for facial expressions, but the gist was, it seemed like a good idea at the time and it was. The Hallows, Harry said. And the sovereign power. The Hallows were the collateral, she said. The gifts death gave to sweeten an arrangement. The sovereign power was the arrangement itself. A master of death who could strengthen the boundary between living and dead, who could call back the fallen and bind them, who would be death's lieutenant among the living. She paused. Not a servant. Death doesn't make servants. It made a partner. Harry absorbed this for a moment. What does death get out of the arrangement? Ignotus looked at him with those ancient stone-gray eyes. Order, she said. The boundary between living and dead, it frays. Without a sovereign it frays badly, over centuries. The fraying is what made Voldemort possible. The Horcruxes. The attempt to cheat death without the authority to do so. She paused. The sovereign's existence, your existence, makes the boundary whole. It doesn't mean nothing dies or nothing is lost. It means the dead stay dead when they should, and come back only when the sovereign calls them. Order. And the ones I've called back, Harry said carefully. They're not against the order. You're the sovereign. When you call them, it is the order. The distinction was important, he could feel that. You're not breaking the rules. You're making the rules. Harry sat with this for a long time. Ignotus waited with the patience of someone who has had centuries to practice waiting. Will you stay? Harry asked finally. As an eternal? She looked at the Shadow Hall, at the walls and the floor and the 15 Eternals who were present in various corners with varying degrees of attention to this conversation. She looked at Harry, really looked, the way the very old look at the very young when they recognize something important. Yes, she said. I will stay. 15 became 16. The Dursley household shifted again in subtle ways around Harry's 9th birthday. Dudley had largely given up on the active hostility that had characterized their early relationship and settled into a sort of wary coexistence. They went to the same school, came home to the same house, and existed in parallel orbits that intersected at mealtimes and occasionally in the garden, where Dudley had begun using Harry's old spot under the oak tree because Harry had pointed out once that it was a better spot for looking at things, and Dudley had tried it and agreed. Vernon had, not mellowed, nothing so simple as that, but found accommodations. He didn't look at Harry for too long. He didn't speak to him if he could help it. He filed Harry in the category of things in his house that he didn't fully understand and had decided not to examine, like the particular creak the third stair made or the way the downstairs bathroom light took 3 flicks to turn on. The system worked for him. Petunia, of all of them, was the most complicated. Harry had watched her for years and built a careful picture, a woman who had wanted something as a child. She'd wanted to go to Hogwarts, wanted the magic, wanted what her sister had, and had been refused, and had spent 30 years building a life on top of that refusal. The house was aggressively normal. The garden was demonstrably perfect. The life was deliberately mundane, each mundane detail a small finger pointed at the world that had excluded her. Look how normal I am. Look how well I've done without it. And then her sister's magical child had appeared on her doorstep and lived in her house, a daily reminder of everything she'd sealed away. Harry didn't resent her for any of it. He found it genuinely interesting, the way he found most things genuinely interesting. And because he was Harry, he did something about it. Your sister liked herbology, he said to Petunia one morning, when they were alone in the kitchen and he'd calculated that she was in the slightly more open state she reached after her second cup of tea. He said it the same way he said everything, without preamble, without softening, just as a fact he was introducing into the conversation. Petunia went very still. She used to write to me about it, Harry said. In the letter you kept. He wasn't apologizing for having read it. He'd read it, that was done. She said you used to help her with the garden. Before Hogwarts. Petunia set her tea down. That's not, she stopped. I just thought you'd want to know, Harry said. That she remembered that. He got up and put his dishes in the sink and went upstairs, and Petunia stood in the kitchen not saying anything for a while. She didn't change. Not dramatically. But she started putting more on his plate at mealtimes, quietly, without making anything of it. Lily watched the whole thing from the shadow space and said, very softly, thank you. Harry shrugged. He'd done it for her. He'd do anything for her, that was simply a fact about him. He raised the final 6 old Potters in his 10th year. One by one, with the wand and Ignotus's guidance and the object anchors from the family vault, a practice sword from one, a healer's kit from another, a scholar's seal, a dueling glove, a wedding band, a child's carved horse that had survived 400 years because it had been loved so completely that love itself had become a preservation charm, he pulled them through the deep dark. 22 Eternals. 22 dead Potters standing in the shadow hall, and at their head Harry stood and looked at them, this army that was also a family, this family that was also an army, this impossible thing he'd built in the shadows of a cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive. James was beside him. How do you feel? He asked. Harry looked at his army. His family. The shadow hall was full of their presence, warm and silver-edged and vast, and the elder wand was in his hand, and the shadow domain stretched in every direction as far as he could reach, which was now, he tested it, very far indeed. Ready, he said. For what? Harry looked at the letter he'd received that morning. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He handed it to James. James read it. His expression moved through several things, nostalgia, complicated feelings about the word pleased, and then something that settled into a particular kind of excitement that Harry recognized as the Potter version of this is going to be interesting. Oh, James said. For that. For all of it, Harry said. Hogwarts. Dumbledore. Voldemort. All of it. He took the letter back and read it again. Not the official printed part, the bottom, where someone had added a handwritten line in a cramped, purple script that hadn't been there when Harry first opened the envelope, I look forward to meeting you at last, Harry. Harry looked at that line for a long time. He thinks he's been managing me, Harry said. He has been managing you, James said carefully. Somewhat. He thinks he still is. Harry folded the letter. Put it in his pocket. He'll find out otherwise. You're 11, James said. You keep noting that. It keeps being true. And it keeps being irrelevant, Harry said, without heat, just precision. He looked at his army. All right. Summer's over. Let's go to school. 22 Eternals in the shadow space straightened like soldiers hearing the order they'd been waiting for. Outside the house, Petunia was sitting in the garden with a cup of tea she'd actually drink, looking at the oak tree, thinking about her sister and the smell of turned earth and a little girl who'd been happy once, helping with the garden in the long summers before everything split apart. Inside, in the shadow under the oak tree, Harry James Potter, Lord Potter, Shadow Monarch, Master of Death, heir of Ignotus Peverell, 11 years old and 2 months, looked at the letter from Hogwarts and made several decisions that would be felt for the rest of the century. The sealed door at the bottom of the shadow domain waited with the patience of something that had always known this moment was coming. Harry would open it soon. But first, school. Chapter 3, The Letter Arrives. The Hogwarts letter brought a second visitor 3 days after it came. Harry was in the garden, running a training sequence with Charles and Pericles, a 2-on-1 that had become his favorite kind of practice because it forced him to think in 3 directions at once, when he felt the new presence at the edge of his shadow network. Not hostile. Not magical in the combat sense. Just a large man moving down Privet Drive with the particular quality of someone trying very hard to be unobtrusive, which never works when you are the size of a small house. Harry dissolved the training sequence and came back into the visible world of the garden and waited. The knock on the front door, when it came, rattled the hinges. Vernon answered it, which Harry heard from the garden, Vernon's voice climbing through its registers of confusion and then alarm, and then the unmistakable bass rumble of someone saying his name. Harry walked around the side of the house and came through the front door, which was still open, and stood in the hall looking at Rubeus Hagrid, who was looking back at him with an expression of prepared warmth that shifted, very slightly, into something more uncertain when it met Harry's eyes. Hagrid, Harry said. Come in. Hagrid blinked. Yeah, you know who I am. I've done my research, Harry said. He stepped back to let Hagrid through, which required Hagrid turning slightly sideways and still nearly taking the doorframe with him, and led him to the kitchen because the sitting room furniture wouldn't survive it. Vernon and Petunia stood in the hallway behind them, frozen in the way people freeze when something too large to be explained is walking through their house. Harry didn't look back at them. It's all right, he said, without turning. Go in the sitting room. I'll handle this. He heard Petunia take Vernon's arm and heard them retreat, and didn't give it any more attention. In the kitchen, Hagrid sat on the floor because there wasn't a chair that would take him, and pulled out a pink umbrella that Harry recognized immediately as a concealed wand, broken wand, if Aldrich's notes about Hagrid's expulsion from Hogwarts were accurate, and produced a slightly squashed birthday cake from somewhere inside his coat. He put it on the table and looked at Harry with the expression of a man running a script that wasn't going quite as written. Happy birthday, Harry, he said. Thank you, Harry said. He sat across from Hagrid at the kitchen table and looked at the cake with genuine appreciation. It had green icing and the letters were slightly wrong, but someone had clearly put effort into it. It's very kind of you to come. Dumbledore sent me, Hagrid said, with the honesty of someone who hadn't been told to be dishonest about it. To bring ya your letter. Introduce ya to the wizarding world. I got the letter, Harry said. And I've been introduced to the wizarding world. But I'm glad you came yourself. He paused. Tell me about Hogwarts. Hagrid's expression opened up the way people's expressions open up when they're given permission to talk about something they love. He talked for 40 minutes about Hogwarts, the grounds, the creatures, the way the Great Hall looked at the start of term, the Forbidden Forest, Quidditch, the houses, the food. He talked about it the way people talk about home, and Harry listened with his whole attention, the way he listened to everything, and filed it all carefully. He also noticed what Hagrid wasn't saying. There was a careful track around the subject of himself, his own past, his relationship with Dumbledore, the things he clearly knew that he'd been told, explicitly or implicitly, not to get into. Hagrid was loyal and guileless and entirely genuine, and he was also operating within a framework that had been constructed for him by someone a great deal more strategic than either of them. When Hagrid wound down, Harry said, "I'll need to go to Diagon Alley for my supplies." That's the plan," Hagrid said, looking slightly relieved to be on more familiar ground. "Tomorrow, if ya like." "Tomorrow," Harry agreed. He stood up. "Would you like a cup of tea before you go?" Hagrid looked at the entirely composed 11-year-old who had just spent 40 minutes asking precise and intelligent questions about a world he'd supposedly never encountered, and said, "Yeah, sure, you're really new to all this?" Harry looked at him steadily. Not a confirmation. Not a denial. Just a look. Hagrid opened his mouth, closed it, and accepted the tea. They went to London the next morning, Harry and Hagrid moving through the summer crowds in a way that turned heads regardless of what Harry did because there was no making Hagrid inconspicuous. Harry didn't mind. He was looking at everything, the leaky cauldron, the brick wall, the alley opening up again in the daylight with shops and noise and the thick layered magic he'd felt the first time and understood better now. The shadow network of Diagon Alley was extraordinary. Centuries of magical activity had layered into the shadows here, deepened them, made them complex and interconnected in ways that Harry could feel immediately as a vast expansion of his domain. He walked down the alley with Hagrid and felt his awareness spread through every shadow in every shop like roots finding water. Hagrid took him to Gringotts first. At the doors, the goblin on duty looked at Harry and said, "Lord Potter," with the precision of an institution that updates its records immediately and holds its clients to their correct titles. Hagrid looked at Harry with the expression of a man whose script had just gone entirely off the page. "Ye've been to Gringotts before?" "Once," Harry said. "But," Dumbledore said, Hagrid stopped himself, visibly. Harry looked at him. Not unkindly. "What did Dumbledore say?" Hagrid's face did several things. He was not a man built for concealment, every thought he had moved across his face in clear sequence. He said ye didn't know anything about the wizarding world. That ye were growin' up with muggles. That I was he stopped again. "Introduce me," Harry said. "Make me feel welcomed. Show me that Dumbledore's people are the kind ones." He said it without accusation. It was simply a description. He's not wrong to want that. He just has slightly wrong information. Hagrid looked deeply uncomfortable. "I don't want to be, I'm not, I like Harry. I'm not trying to, I know," Harry said. "You're not doing anything wrong, Hagrid. You're doing exactly what you were asked to do, and I think you'd have done most of it anyway, without being asked, because you're that kind of person." He paused. "I'd like to be your friend. Genuinely. Not because it's useful and not because of politics." He met Hagrid's eyes. "Can we do that?" Hagrid looked at him for a long moment. Then his face settled into something much simpler and much warmer. "Yeah," he said gruffly. "We can do that." Inside Gringotts, the Trust Vault visit was brief. Harry had most of what he needed already, but there were specific items that were better purchased than carried from the shadow space, and he needed to be seen doing ordinary school supply shopping. He took enough gold to be comfortable and followed Hagrid out, and then they went to the third vault, the Sovereign Vault, which Hagrid didn't know about, and Harry navigated through a quiet word with Sharpclaw that involved no explanation and required no escort because the vault responded only to Harry. He retrieved several things from the Sovereign Vault and redistributed them in his shadow space where they'd be accessible without being visible. Then he went back to Hagrid and they began the school supply run. Madame Malkin's first, 4 robes. There was a boy already there when they arrived, being fitted on the footstool next to the one Harry was directed to, pale, blonde, with the particular posture of someone who has been taught that posture communicates status and has internalized it completely. He glanced at Harry with the sideways assessment of someone who categorizes people quickly. Hogwarts, he said. Yes, Harry said. Me too. First year. Father's getting my wand. The boy looked at Harry's slightly too large clothes with the automatic social calculation of a pure-blood child who has been told what clothes say about people. Which house do you think you'll be in? I haven't decided, Harry said. The boy blinked. You can't decide. Can't you? Harry said. A pause. I'm going to be in Slytherin. All our family have been. Something in his tone expected a reaction to this, either deference or hostility. He seemed slightly thrown by getting neither. What family are you from? Potter, Harry said. The boy's expression shifted immediately, a rapid recalculation, something between excitement and a kind of automatic political interest that Harry recognized as the habit of a house that thought about alliances before it thought about anything else. Potter. Harry Potter. Yes. I'm Draco. Draco Malfoy. He said the name the way his father had probably taught him to say it, with the expectation that it would mean something. Then he looked at Harry again and the calculation was running fast behind his eyes. You should know, there are right sorts and wrong sorts at Hogwarts. I can help you, I appreciate that, Harry said pleasantly. He meant it, which seemed to confuse Draco considerably. Tell me about the wrong sorts. Draco opened his mouth, reorganized, and began to explain the social architecture of Hogwarts from the perspective of a pure-blood Slytherin heir who'd been briefed extensively and had his own firmly established views about where power lived. Harry listened. He was genuinely interested. Not in the framework Draco was presenting, he had Doria's much more nuanced and considerably more accurate version of wizarding social dynamics, but in the boy presenting it. There was intelligence in there, and a kind of desperate performance of certainty that Harry recognized as someone who has been given a map so confidently that they've never questioned whether the territory actually matches. You'll want to be careful about the Weasleys, Draco said. Blood traitors. They'll drag you down. Harry said. And mudbloods, he said it with the ease of someone who's heard it as a natural word all their life, not as a slur. Harry looked at him. Not angry, something cooler than that. The look that made things stop. Don't say that word around me, he said. My mother was Muggle-born. Draco's mouth closed. He looked at Harry and seemed to recalibrate rapidly, something he was apparently capable of doing when the situation demanded it. Right. My apologies. Harry accepted this without making it a larger thing than it was. Draco Malfoy was a product of his raising. The question of whether he could become something more than that product was genuinely open, and Harry, unlike most people who would encounter this boy, was in the habit of keeping genuinely open questions open. Good luck with your sorting, Harry said, when they were done. He stepped off the footstool and followed Hagrid out, and felt Draco's eyes on his back until the shop door closed. Ollivander's was last. The shop felt different to Harry's shadow senses than everywhere else in the alley. Every other location had shadows that were simply themselves, complex, layered, magic-saturated. Ollivander's had shadows that were listening. The accumulated resonance of 10,000 wands, the personality of a man who had spent a lifetime with the deep things, had done something to the dark corners of this place that made them peculiarly aware. Old Mr. Ollivander was already watching him when Harry came through the door. His pale eyes moved to Harry's immediately, with the directness of someone who finds eyes more interesting than faces. Mr. Potter, he said softly. I wondered. Have you been expecting me? Harry said. In the general sense, Ollivander said. Not the specific. He came out from behind his counter, moving through the stacked wand boxes with the ease of absolute familiarity. Hold out your wand hand. I have a wand, Harry said. Ollivander went still. It's not standard, Harry said, which was the understatement of the century. He didn't produce the Elder Wand, he produced his shadow touch, let the old wand maker feel the resonance of a wand that had been in the deepest vault in Gringotts for 600 years, whose lineage ran back to Antioch Peverell, whose power was of a different order entirely than anything Ollivander would have in his shop. Ollivander's pale eyes went from Harry's face to his empty hand to Harry's face again. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite awe. It was the expression of a man who has spent his whole life believing that wands choose wizards, meeting a wizard who appears to have chosen his wand, or more accurately to have been chosen by something above both wands and wizards. "I see," Ollivander said. Very quietly. "Yes." A long pause. "The wand you carry. Do you know what it is?" "Yes," Harry said. "Has it accepted you?" Harry thought about the surge in Gringotts. The way the shadow domain had expanded when he picked it up, as if the wand had been holding space for him. "Yes." Ollivander nodded slowly. He looked at Harry for a long moment, and then he said, quite suddenly and out of nowhere, "You'll do extraordinary things. Terrible things." He blinked. "Forgive me. I shouldn't. Extraordinary and terrible aren't always different things," Harry said. "Will you still sell me a wand? A backup wand. For practice." Ollivander's expression settled back into something more professional, though his eyes remained troubled. "Of course." He paused. "May I ask, the wand you carry, was it? It was once known as..." "Yes," Harry said. Another silence. Then, Ollivander said carefully, with the air of someone choosing words from a very limited safe supply, "I imagine the next few years will be educational. For everyone." The backup wand he sold Harry was 11 inches, poly, phoenix feather, the twin of Voldemort's wand, which Ollivander pointed out with a kind of inevitable academic honesty that suggested he'd known this moment was coming since the night Voldemort visited his shop. Harry took the wand, felt its particular resonance, the phoenix connection, the shared core, and filed it as information. He paid. He thanked Ollivander. He walked out into the alley where Hagrid was waiting with a worried expression he was trying to make into a neutral expression. "Everything all right?" Hagrid said. "Everything's fine," Harry said. "What's next?" There was one more stop Harry made, separate from Hagrid, which required telling Hagrid he needed to use the Gringotts facilities and then slipping through the shadow network instead to a small, narrow shop that Doria had told him about, not on the main thoroughfare, down a side passage, with a sign that said Arkwright and Sons, Specialist Acquisitions, which was the wizarding world's very polite term for a shop that dealt in things that were available but not advertised. He was looking for something specific, current information about Voldemort. He didn't find Voldemort. He found something almost as useful, a thin wizard with tired eyes who sold him, for a reasonable amount of gold and a conversation he'd clearly been wanting to have with someone intelligent for a long time, a complete summary of the current state of the Death Eater situation, the political landscape of post-war wizarding Britain, and, most usefully, a private account of the rumors circulating about the Philosopher's Stone. "Flamel's stone," the wizard said. He was speaking quietly, with the air of someone who mentions certain things at certain volumes and not higher. "The story is that it's been moved. Nicholas Flamel's been in contact with Dumbledore. Well, it's been moved to Hogwarts for safekeeping. Secure vault." Harry was quiet for a moment. Secure vault at a school. Dumbledore seems to think the school itself is the best possible fortress. A pause. Which would be true, if the threat were external. What's the internal threat? The wizard looked at him. Reconsidered how much he was going to say to an 11-year-old. Made an assessment that reconsidered the reconsideration. "Rumor," he said, "says that someone who wants the stone is already positioned to access it from inside." "Thank you," Harry said. He paid and went back to find Hagrid, and spent the walk to the Leaky Cauldron building a new model in his head of what the school year was going to look like. Voldemort. The stone. A mole inside Hogwarts. Dumbledore playing fortress while the threat was already through the gate. Harry thought, this is going to be a busy year. He thought it with something that was, if you looked carefully, satisfaction. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross on the 1st of September and Harry was on it. He'd said goodbye to Privet Drive without ceremony. He'd said goodbye to Petunia in the kitchen, where she'd stood with her arms crossed and an expression that was doing a great deal of heavy lifting over several layers of feeling, and Harry had looked at her and said, "I'll write," which surprised her enough that she didn't respond before he was out the door. He meant it. He would write. She was connected to Lily, and Lily mattered, and whatever else Petunia Dursley was, she was a thread. His trunk was on the train. His shadow space was populated with 22 Eternals who traveled with him everywhere, woven into whatever shadows were available. On the train, they distributed through the carriage shadows and the luggage rack shadows and the ones that gathered under seats in the mid-morning light, thin but sufficient. Harry found an empty compartment and sat with his book, Ignotus's personal notes on the shadow domain, which had been in the Sovereign Vault and were the most useful document he'd ever encountered, and waited to see who the train would send him. The red-haired boy came first, asking if Harry's compartment was free, with the particular directness of someone who's been raised in a large family and hasn't had the luxury of being tentative about things. Harry said yes, and the boy came in and introduced himself as Ron Weasley with a grin that was uncomplicated in a way Harry found genuinely refreshing. They talked for a few minutes, easy, friendly conversation, Ron doing most of the talking, which Harry didn't mind because Ron was interesting. He'd grown up in the wizarding world, had 5 older brothers, knew Hogwarts the way you know a place that exists in your house as myth and legend before you arrive there in person. He had a rat and opinions about Quidditch and zero pretension about who Harry was, which Harry appreciated more than he could have explained. Then Ron said, "Are you really Harry Potter?" because he'd clearly figured it out and had been sitting on the question. "Yes," Harry said. "Wicked," Ron said, with the perfect simplicity of someone for whom that is the complete response. Harry smiled. Actually smiled, the real one, not the polite one. The second arrival knocked, which was a nice contrast. A girl with large front teeth and bushy hair opened the compartment door and said, in the manner of someone who has a reason for her inquiry and sees no reason to bury it in pleasantries, "Have either of you seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Harry said. "But come in. I'll look." She came in looking faintly surprised at the invitation. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said. "Harry Potter." She looked at him with an expression that recalibrated rapidly and then settled into something Harry recognized, assessment. She was assessing him the way he assessed things, systematically, quickly, looking for useful information. He found this extremely interesting. "I've read about you," she said. "In a history of magic and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. What did they say? That you survived the killing curse when you were 15 months old and that nobody knows how." She was watching him as she said it, with the frank curiosity of someone who genuinely wants to know the answer and isn't pretending otherwise. Harry looked back at her. "What do you think?" "I think the most common theory, your mother's sacrifice creating a protective charm, is the most likely, but it's insufficient on its own. The killing curse doesn't rebound. Nothing in the literature describes a successful rebound. So there must be a secondary factor that the books don't cover." She paused. "I think you know what it is." Harry thought about Ignotus. About the shadow domain. About Death's partner and the Order of the Boundary and 22 Eternals woven into the shadows of this train compartment. He thought about all of that, and he looked at Hermione Granger, and he said, "Sit down. We'll find Neville's toad." He pressed his awareness into the shadow network of the train, the shadows under every seat in every compartment, and felt the small warm creature shadow of a toad in the 4th compartment forward. He couldn't retrieve it through shadow, living things other than his Eternals didn't travel that way, but he could feel exactly where it was. "4th compartment forward," he said. "Under the left seat." Hermione stared at him. "How did you? You didn't even look, does it matter?" Harry said. "The toad is in the 4th compartment." She went. She came back 3 minutes later with the toad and a freckle-faced boy behind her, round-faced, soft-eyed, with the particular careful quality of someone who has been told they're not impressive enough times that they've started to believe it, who turned out to be Neville Longbottom. Neville sat down with his toad and looked at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard not to be obvious about what it was. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "Yes. My gran talks about your parents," Neville said. She was friends with your grandmother. Doria Potter." He said the name with the reverence of someone citing a historical figure. Something warm moved through Harry's chest, entirely involuntary. "My great-grandmother Doria," he said carefully. "She was brilliant, apparently. Really brilliant. Gran always says she was the smartest person she ever met." Neville flushed slightly. "Sorry. That's probably, you don't know her, you were a baby." "I know her," Harry said. Neville blinked. "Oh." Harry didn't explain. "What's your toad's name?" "Trevor." "Good name," Harry said, with the total sincerity of someone who means what they say and doesn't embellish. Neville looked slightly startled, as if good names for toads were not usually commented on favorably, and then he relaxed in the particular way people relax when they realize they're not going to be made fun of. The four of them, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, rode the train north, and Harry watched them and listened and thought, these are the ones. Not because of strategy, not because of political utility. Because Ron Weasley had an uncomplicated grin and 7 siblings and 0 pretension, because Hermione Granger had a brain like a blade and the intellectual courage to use it, because Neville Longbottom was going to be something when he got enough room to be it, and Harry could see that as clearly as he could see the shadows. In the shadow space, James was sitting next to Harry and making no effort to hide that he was delighted. "Don't," Harry said, very quietly, as the train moved north and the other 3 were occupied with something else. "What?" "I'm just sitting here." "You're radiating, I told you so." "I would never." "I'm very mature." A pause. "I told you so." "I'm aware." "Friends," James said. "Real ones. Look at that." Harry looked at the 3 of them, Hermione arguing something at Neville who was nodding enthusiastically while Ron made a face at the frog, and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say that his expression wasn't already saying. Hogwarts at night. They came across the lake in the boats and Harry watched the castle come out of the dark and felt it, enormous, old, layered. The shadow network here was like nothing he'd encountered before. Hogwarts wasn't just old, it was alive in the way that places where magic has been practiced for 1,000 years become alive. The shadows here had memory. They knew things. And as Harry stepped off the boat onto the landing, the shadows of Hogwarts reached back toward him like the tide coming in, recognizing him, the sovereign arriving in a domain that had never had one visit it before. He breathed it in. The cold air, the torchlight, the smell of stone and water and centuries. "Impressive," said James, somewhere in the shadow space, and for once he wasn't being sardonic. McGonagall met them in the entrance hall, brisk, sharp-eyed, with the particular kind of no-nonsense that Harry recognized as actual capability rather than the performance of it. She looked at the crowd of first-years and gave them the standard instructions and then her eyes found Harry and stopped, just briefly, the way eyes do when they find something not entirely expected. Harry met her gaze calmly and she moved on without remark. They waited in a small chamber off the hall. The other first-years were nervous, that specific performance of bravery that 11-year-olds give when they're scared and don't want to show it. Draco Malfoy had found Harry again and was standing nearby with his group, 2 large boys who appeared to be more muscle than biography, watching Harry with the unresolved fascination of someone who doesn't know yet whether to be impressed or competitive. Ron was beside Harry. "What house do you think?" "Doesn't matter much," Harry said. Ron stared. "Doesn't. Houses are organizational structures. What matters is who you are in them." He paused. "Though I have a preference." "Which?" Harry considered. Doria had been Slytherin. Charles had been Gryffindor. His parents had been Gryffindor. Ignotus hadn't been sorted at all because Hogwarts hadn't existed yet. He thought about what he was, what the Shadow Monarch actually was at its core, and thought about which house came closest to containing that. "I'll tell you after," he said. The doors to the great hall opened. The ceiling was the first thing, the sky above, enchanted and real-seeming, the stars blazing through summer's end. Harry looked up at it and felt the shadow domain resonate with the stars, which he hadn't expected, and filed it as something to examine later. Then the rows of students and faculty, the 500 pairs of eyes turning toward them, the particular weight of collective attention that an entrance demands. He walked in and didn't perform anything. He wasn't looking for eyes on him or trying to avoid them. He was looking at the room, the shadows under the tables, the dark corners where the torchlight didn't reach, the deep shadow above the ceiling's enchantment. By the time he reached the front of the hall, he had a complete map. The sorting hat sat on its stool. McGonagall called names from the list. Students went, the hat declared, tables cheered. Potter, Harry. Absolute silence, then a sound like a wave, half the hall leaning forward, the other half going still. Harry walked up. Sat on the stool. The hat dropped over his eyes. The voice in the hat was interesting, old and self-satisfied and genuinely curious, with the quality of something that has looked into 10,000 minds and found most of them legible. It found Harry and went very quiet for a moment. Well, the hat said. This is different. Yes, Harry agreed. I see a great deal. Courage, yes. Ambition, considerable. Intelligence of a very particular kind. Loyalty that runs deeper than most people's loyalty runs in a lifetime. A pause. And something else. Something I don't have a category for. Something that isn't a house. I know, Harry said. You could be any of them. Truly. Every house has something that fits you. Another pause. But you have a preference. I can see it. Gryffindor, Harry said. Not because it was tactical. Not because his parents were Gryffindors, though they were. Because when he thought about himself, about what he was, what he'd built, what he was going to do, the thing at the center of it wasn't cunning or knowledge or loyalty but will. The refusal to be afraid. The willingness to stand in the front because the front was where things were decided. Gryffindor, the hat declared, and the noise from the Gryffindor table was enormous. Harry took the hat off and put it back on the stool and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down, and the noise continued for slightly longer than it had for anyone else, and Harry sat through it with the patience of someone waiting for a wave to pass. Ron sat next to him. On his other side, after the sorting finished, Hermione. Neville across the table, with Trevor in his pocket. Dumbledore rose to welcome the school. Harry looked at him. He'd read everything about Albus Dumbledore. He'd had Doria's account, Charles's account, Fleamont's account, and the books Aldrich had recommended, and the information from the Thin Wizard in Diagon Alley, and his own analysis of everything Dumbledore had done and not done since 1981. He had a complete picture. Dumbledore was brilliant. He was genuinely kind, in the way that people with a profound investment in being right can be kind. He cared about Harry, not as a person, exactly, not yet, but as a symbol, as the instrument of a strategy he'd been building since before Harry was born. He was afraid of power he couldn't understand or predict. And he had a plan for Harry Potter that had been running since the night of Godric's Hollow, and every element of that plan assumed a particular kind of Harry, grateful, malleable, attached to the world Dumbledore offered, and ignorant of everything Dumbledore hadn't chosen to tell him. He was going to be disappointed on every count, and Harry felt it was important to be honest about that as soon as possible. Dumbledore's eyes, making their twinkling circuit of the hall, found Harry. Harry met them steadily. Something moved in the old man's expression, just briefly, just the beginning of the recalibration Harry had seen on Hagrid's face, on Ollivander's, on Sharpclaw's. The moment where someone looked at him and understood that the picture they'd been working from needed updating. Harry held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked back at his plate, and began to eat. Under the table, the shadows of Hogwarts pulsed once, warmly, deeply, a vast institution recognizing something it had been waiting for, and then went still. Across the hall at the staff table, Severus Snape was watching Harry Potter with narrowed eyes and an expression that contained several things in very close quarters. Harry felt the attention and looked up and met Snape's gaze without flinching, and something flickered in the potions professor's face. Not Harry's father's eyes, looking back at him. Not James Potter's arrogance. Something else entirely. Something Snape didn't have a frame for, and the absence of the frame was, Harry thought, probably unsettling. Good, Harry thought. Start as you mean to go on. He went back to his dinner, and the shadows of Hogwarts settled around him like a kingdom around its king. Chapter 4, The School of Magic Meets Its King. The dormitory was cold at 2 in the morning, which suited Harry perfectly. His 4 dorm mates were asleep, Ron with the particular abandon of someone who sleeps the way they do everything else, completely. Neville curled protectively around the space where Trevor habitually escaped to, 2 others named Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas who Harry had catalogued during dinner and filed as decent and interesting respectively. The room breathed with the slow rhythm of 5 11-year-olds at the end of their first overwhelming day. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and pressed his awareness into Hogwarts. He'd been waiting for the others to sleep so he could do this properly. The castle's shadow network was unlike anything he'd mapped before, not just complex but layered, centuries of shadow stacked on centuries, each layer retaining something of the magic that had passed through it. The founders had built Hogwarts on a site that was already old when they chose it, and the old magic underneath ran deep and strange, and Harry wanted to understand it before morning because understanding terrain before anyone else did was simply good practice. He spent 2 hours mapping. By the time he was done, he knew Hogwarts the way he knew the garden at Privet Drive, completely, intimately, every shadow and extension of himself. He knew the passages that the shadows revealed that no map would show. He knew which rooms had been sealed for decades and what was in them. He knew the 3rd-floor corridor that Dumbledore had warned them about at dinner, and he knew what was behind the door at the end of it, and he thought, there it is. He also found something else. On the 7th floor, behind a door that wasn't always there, a room that changed, shifted its contents to fit its visitor's need. The shadows inside it were extraordinary, self-generating, complex beyond any other room in the castle. Harry filed it as useful and moved on. In the dungeons, something with a very old and very unpleasant shadow signature lived in a classroom that smelled of ingredients he could identify from Euphemia's knowledge of magical medicine. He touched that shadow briefly and pulled back immediately. Whatever was down there was wrong in a way that went deeper than dark magic. It was the feeling of something that should have moved on but hadn't, something holding on to life with the grip of desperation rather than the authority of a sovereign. He'd felt that feeling before. It was the feeling of a Horcrux. Not Voldemort's physical presence, not yet, not here, but the residue of him. The stain of a soul fragment that had touched something in these dungeons and left a mark. Harry wasn't sure of the source yet. He filed it and moved on and went to sleep. He woke up at 6, before everyone else, and was showered and dressed and reading in the common room before the castle properly started its morning. Hermione came down at 6:45, looked at him, and said, "Oh good," with the relief of someone who has been quietly worried about being the first one up. "Sit down," Harry said. "I want to ask you something." She sat. Her hair was doing something complicated in the morning light and she had the alert expression of someone whose brain comes fully online immediately, without the gradual warm-up that most people need. "What? How much do you know about Horcruxes?" The word dropped into the quiet common room and Hermione went very still. Harry watched her face, surprise, then the internal card catalog search, then a careful look at him. That's very dark magic. I read about them briefly. Splitting the soul, it's considered one of the worst." She stopped. "Why?" "I felt something in the dungeons last night. A shadow. Wrong in a specific way." He said this the same way he said everything, directly, without apology for the fact that he'd been mapping the castle's shadow network at 2 in the morning, because explaining that would take longer than simply proceeding. "I think there's a fragment. Of Voldemort. Down there." Hermione looked at him steadily. She wasn't going to faint or reach for dramatic language, he'd already assessed that. She was going to think. He's not dead, she said slowly. That's what the books suggest. That he didn't die the night she looked at Harry's scar. No, Harry said. He's not dead. He made horcruxes. Pieces of his soul, anchored to objects. It's how he survived. How do you know all this? Harry looked at her. Research. What kind of research covers, Harry? Horcruxes are in restricted texts. You can't just, I have a large library, Harry said. And several very knowledgeable advisors. Hermione looked like she had several follow-up questions about this and was visibly choosing the most immediately useful one. If there's a fragment here, at Hogwarts, there's also the Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Stored somewhere on the 3rd floor. A pause. You know about the stone. I know about the stone. And you think, she was building the model fast, he could see it. You think Voldemort wants the stone. To make a new body. And he's already inside, Harry said. Yes. Who? I don't know yet. I need a bit more time. Hermione sat with this for a moment. Then she did something Harry appreciated enormously. She didn't panic, didn't spiral into what should we do, didn't immediately reach for an authority figure. She said, what do you need from me? Research, Harry said. Horcruxes. Every text you can find on soul magic. Anything in the library, restricted section if necessary. I can't access, I'll get you access. She looked at him. How? He considered whether to explain the Lord Potter lordship and the corresponding influence and decided it was simpler to say, trust me. She looked at him for 3 more seconds, making a decision. All right, she said. And you'll tell me what's actually going on. All of it? Eventually, Harry said. As it becomes relevant. That's a very politician's answer. Yes, he agreed. She made a face that contained her opinion of politicians' answers and then picked up her schedule and began organizing her approach to the day, because that was what Hermione Granger did when given a problem, she organized. Harry watched her and thought that she was going to be absolutely extraordinary. Potions was first. Snape walked into the classroom with the particular energy of someone who has decided the room belongs to him before he enters it, and stood at the front and looked out over the heads of his new first years with the expression of a man who finds most people slightly inadequate and has made peace with it. He called register. Got to Harry's name and paused, one beat, just one, and said it with the exact same inflection as every other name. Harry gave him credit for that. Then Snape began his speech, the bewitching of the mind, the ensnaring of the senses, and Harry sat and listened and gave Snape the same complete attention he gave everything, which Snape apparently noticed because his eyes returned to Harry twice during the speech before he started asking questions. Potter. Snape's voice carried across the room with the ease of long practice. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Draught of living death, Harry said. He didn't hesitate and didn't perform the hesitation that social expectation suggested might be polite. The most powerful sleeping potion known. Asphodel belongs to the lily family, which is relevant to its inclusion. The plant's connection to mourning in ancient symbolism isn't incidental to its magical properties. The last part was his own addition. He saw Snape process it, a flicker of something in those careful dark eyes. Not the hostility he'd been prepared to deploy. Something else. Where would you look, Snape said, adjusting, if I asked you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. It's a universal antidote, or was, before more specific antidotes were developed. Still useful for poisonings that are difficult to identify quickly. Another pause. The class was very quiet with the quality of quiet that happens when people realize they're watching something they didn't expect. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Nothing. They're the same plant. Also called aconite. Extremely poisonous, the root most of all. It has legitimate potions applications, but the toxicological profile makes it a useful marker for certain kinds of dark magic. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Not the look Harry had expected, not the look he'd calibrated to give James Potter's son, the prepared contempt for inherited arrogance. This was a look of recalibration. Harry recognized it now, he'd seen it enough times in the last week to know it immediately. It appears, Snape said, quietly, that fame isn't everything. No, Harry agreed. It isn't. Something moved in Snape's expression that Harry couldn't fully parse. It was complicated in a way that would take longer to understand, layered with things that had nothing to do with Harry and everything to do with the name Potter and a girl with red hair and green eyes who had died for her son. Harry held his gaze and didn't look away, and Snape, after a moment, moved on to the rest of the class. Ron leaned over during the actual brewing and said, out of the corner of his mouth, "How did you know all that?" "Books," Harry said. "You read potions books?" "For fun." "I read everything for fun." Ron thought about this. "That sounds like a lot of fun," he said, with complete and authentic sincerity, which Harry had already identified as one of Ron's best qualities. He meant the things he said. There was no gap between what he said and what he meant, which was rarer than people acknowledged. "It is," Harry said. By the end of the first week, the school had established its preliminary opinion of Harry Potter, which it would revise several times over the coming months. The preliminary opinion was, strange. Not in the way of someone who is awkward or damaged or socially impaired, but in the way of someone who is operating at a different altitude than the people around them. He was never loud and never performed. He was always completely present. When he was in a conversation, he was in it, and when he was working, the quality of his attention was something you could physically feel if you were nearby. He was genuinely kind to people who weren't expecting it and entirely unmoved by people who expected to impress him. He was also, within a week, the best student in every class. Not aggressively, he didn't perform it, didn't volunteer constantly or run competitively against Hermione, who was the second best student in every class, which she was handling with the adjustment period of someone who has been first for so long that second is an interesting new situation. He simply did the work at the level the work could be done at, and that level was substantially higher than what was expected of first years. Flitwick nearly fell off his stack of books the first time Harry cast a Wingardium Leviosa. It wasn't just that the feather levitated, it was that he adjusted its position 3 times mid-cast with the control of someone who has been moving things with his mind for years, which he had, just not through this particular channel. McGonagall watched him transfigure a match to a needle in his second transfiguration lesson, and then transfigure it back, and then, because he clearly had time and inclination, attempt the next exercise in the textbook without being told, and she said nothing during class but kept him after and asked, with the directness Harry appreciated in her, how much experience he had with wand work. "Limited formal experience," Harry said. "But I understand the theory thoroughly." "More than the theory," McGonagall said. "Perhaps the theory goes deeper than the standard curriculum assumes," Harry said. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. She had the face of someone who has decided not to ask a question she thinks she might not get a straight answer to. "Your parents were exceptional students," she said finally. "Both of them." "I know," Harry said. "I've heard a great deal about them." "From whom?" "People who knew them," Harry said simply. McGonagall's eyes were sharp on his for a moment. Then she let him go. The Quidditch tryout situation resolved itself on a Thursday in the 3rd week. Harry hadn't gone looking for it. He'd been walking back from the library, having delivered to Hermione a note from himself as Lord Potter formally requesting access to the restricted section for research purposes, which the librarian Madame Pants had accepted with the slightly dazed expression of someone who has never had an 11-year-old produce a lordship authorization before, when he'd cut through the entrance courtyard and found a group of third-year Gryffindors and Slytherins in the middle of something. The center of it was a small boy, first-year, Gryffindor. Harry had seen him in passing but not spoken to him yet, standing with his back against the courtyard wall while a Slytherin third-year held something above his head. A Remembrall, by the look of it. "Give it back," the boy said. He had the voice of someone who has decided they're not going to beg even though they want to. "Come up and get it," the Slytherin said. Harry walked through the group and stopped in front of the Slytherin. He was 6 inches shorter and 2 years younger, and he looked at the older boy with exactly the same expression he gave everything. "Put it down," Harry said. The Slytherin looked at him. Made the obvious assessment: small, young, not physically threatening. "Mind your own." The shadow under the Slytherin's feet moved. Not dramatically, not a monster, not a claw, just a subtle shift, the shadows of the courtyard deepening around that one spot, a presence that wasn't visible but was absolutely felt. The temperature dropped by 2 degrees in a 12-inch radius. Every hair on every arm in the immediate vicinity stood up. The Slytherin's expression changed. He looked down. He saw nothing. But he felt it, that bottom of the stairs feeling, that deep dark feeling, the specific terror of something enormous that you cannot see, and his hand dropped to his side and the remembrall fell and Harry caught it and handed it to the small boy without looking away from the Slytherin. "Good choice," Harry said. The Slytherin left. His friends left with him, with the particular speed of people choosing not to know what just happened. The courtyard breathed back to normal temperature. The small boy was looking at Harry with enormous eyes. "How did you do that?" "Do what?" Harry said pleasantly. His face he made a reasonable decision, Harry said. "What's your name?" "Colin Creevey." He looked at the remembrall in his hands. "This was my grand's." A pause. "Thank you." "Sure," Harry said, and went back to the library. He was halfway up the stairs when he heard someone behind him moving fast, not threatening, just urgent, and turned to find Ron, breathing hard, who had apparently been watching from the side of the courtyard. "What," Ron said, "was that?" "What was what?" Harry said. Ron stared at him. "Harry." His face. "I've never seen anyone look like that." He looked like he searched for the word. Like something grabbed him. "He dropped the remembrall," Harry said. "That's the important part." Ron walked beside him up the stairs and was quiet for a bit, which for Ron was significant. Then, "Are you going to tell me what's actually going on with you?" Harry looked at him. Ron was watching him with the straight-on directness of a person who isn't performing a question, who actually wants the answer. Not with fear, not with suspicion. Just with the openness of someone who has decided to trust and is waiting to see if that trust was a good call. "Yes," Harry said. "Eventually. When I know you well enough." "How long does that take?" "I don't know. I've never had to figure it out before." He paused. "Soon." Ron seemed to find this acceptable. "Okay," he said, and the subject was filed rather than dropped. Harry appreciated the difference. He told Neville first. He wasn't sure he'd planned to, but they ended up alone in the dormitory on a Sunday, everyone else at Quidditch practice or the library or the grounds, and Neville was attempting his transfiguration homework with the expression of someone fighting a battle on unfavorable terrain, and Harry sat across from him and watched for a bit and said, "You're overcorrecting." "I know," Neville said, with the defeat of someone who has already identified the problem and is unable to fix it. "The wand movement. You're compensating for something, for the expectation of failure. You're doing the motion too carefully. You need to commit to it." "Easy for you," Neville said, without resentment, just as a fact. "Not as easy as it looks," Harry said. He paused. "Neville. What do you know about the Shadow Monarchs?" Neville looked up from his homework. The shift was too sudden to be anything other than deliberate, and Neville was perceptive enough, in the quiet way of people who have spent a great deal of time watching and not being watched, to notice that. He put his quill down. "Why?" "Because your grandmother was friends with my great-grandmother," Harry said. "And I think Augusta Longbottom knows things about the Potter bloodline that she's told her grandson." Neville was quiet for a long moment. Gran said, he stopped. She said Doria Potter was the last of an old line of power. Something that went back further than any of the sacred 28. She said when Doria died she was worried because, he stopped again. Because the power dies with the line, Harry said. Yes. Neville looked at him very carefully. Has it? No, Harry said. Another long silence. Neville's expression moved through several things and landed on something that wasn't surprise, or wasn't only surprise. It was more like confirmation. The face of someone who has had a feeling for a while and is now seeing it become true. Yes. And your parents. Neville had met James and Lily, in theory, as historical figures his grandmother had mentioned. He was now doing something with his face that looked like he was very carefully not saying what he was thinking. They're here, Harry said. In a manner of speaking. Neville absorbed this. He sat very still, which for Neville was the outward expression of extremely active internal processing. Then he said, the shadows in this room feel different since you arrived. Warmer. I thought I was imagining it. You weren't, Harry said. And in the dormitory at night, when everyone's asleep, he stopped. You can feel them, Harry said. I didn't want to mention it, Neville said carefully. In case you didn't want, I don't mind you knowing, Harry said. I mind the wrong people knowing. You're not the wrong people, Neville. Something in Neville settled, physically, you could see it, a tension he'd probably been carrying since first arriving at school going out of his shoulders. Okay, he said. Okay, Harry agreed. They went back to Neville's transfiguration homework, and Harry talked him through the wand movement until Neville managed to turn the match to a needle cleanly 3 times running, and Neville's expression at the third success was the kind of expression that changes something in a person's understanding of themselves. Harry watched it happen and thought, there it is. There's who he is. You just needed to commit, Harry said. I just needed to commit, Neville agreed, and he sounded surprised by himself in the best possible way. The Quirrell situation crystallized in October. Harry had been tracking the shadow signature in the dungeon classroom since the first week, monitoring it, testing it, trying to identify the source more precisely. The residue pointed to an object rather than a person, which was interesting. Something down there had been touched by a Horcrux, or contained remnants of one, and then Quirrell walked into the Great Hall for breakfast one morning and Harry felt it. Not the dungeon. Not an object. Quirrell himself. The shadow signature he'd been feeling in the dungeon was echoed, stronger, closer, concentrated, in the flutter of Quirrell's ridiculous turban, which turned out not to be so ridiculous after all. Harry sat at breakfast and felt the wrongness of it radiating across the hall and thought, there you are. He wasn't sure at first whether Quirrell knew what he was carrying. He watched him for a week and determined that yes, Quirrell knew, and yes, Quirrell was frightened of it, and yes, Quirrell was also complicit, that combination of terror and willingness that dark magic produces in its followers when they've gone past the point of easy extraction. He told Hermione that Thursday in the library, in a corner shadow quiet enough for privacy. She looked at him over the top of a text on soul magic she'd been cross-referencing. Quirrell, she said flatly. Not a question. The turban, Harry said. There's something in the turban. On the back of his head, Harry said. If Voldemort made a Horcrux, he paused, assembling the model carefully. He didn't make just one. The dark shadow I've been sensing, it's not a stored soul fragment, it's the remnant of Voldemort himself. The part that survived the rebound in 1981. He latched onto Quirrell. Hermione set the book down very precisely. He's possessing a teacher. Sharing a body. The turban covers the face on the back of Quirrell's head. How do you know about the face? Shadow sense, Harry said. The same way I found Trevor. She accepted this without pushing the specifics, which Harry appreciated. So the plan is to use Quirrell to get to the stone. He's already on the 3rd floor, I saw him there last week during the Halloween feast. I thought he was, mapping the defenses, Harry said. We need to tell Dumbledore. No, Harry said. She looked at him. Harry, Dumbledore knows, Harry said. The stone is here because Dumbledore wanted it here. The defenses around it are Dumbledore's design. He's created a trap for Voldemort, he wants to catch him trying for the stone. She stopped. That's incredibly reckless. Yes. He's using the stone as bait. And us as incidental occupants of the hunting ground. Harry paused. I'm not angry about it. It's tactically reasonable. But it means telling Dumbledore accomplishes nothing except warning Voldemort that we know. Hermione's expression moved through several things in rapid succession. Harry watched her work through the ethical dimensions and the tactical ones and the things she found troubling about both, and then watched her arrive at the same conclusion he'd arrived at, which was a specific kind of conclusion that only genuinely intelligent people can reach because it requires holding your instinct still long enough to think. So we wait, she said. We prepare, Harry said. And we wait. For what? For Voldemort to make his move. Harry paused. And then we make ours. Hermione studied him. You want to face him. I want to end it, Harry said. The stone is bait. Quirrell is his vehicle. But Voldemort, the real Voldemort, what's left of him, he wants more than the stone. He wants me. He's always wanted me. He'll come to wherever I am eventually. He met her eyes. I'd rather choose the ground. The third-floor corridor, she said. On my terms, Harry said. Not his. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to be there. I know, Harry said. Don't try to talk me out of it. I won't. She picked up her book again. Then we prepare, she said, with the particular finality of someone who has made a decision and is moving directly to implementation. We prepare, Harry agreed. Halloween came and went, and the troll incident happened, and Harry handled it differently than it would have happened otherwise. He knew the troll was coming before it arrived, he felt the shadow disturbance in the dungeons, a large creature's absence making a gap in the shadow network, and he was on his feet and moving out of the Great Hall before Quirrell's dramatic announcement even finished reverberating. He told Ron to get McGonagall and went for the girls' bathroom because he'd already noted, earlier in the term, that Hermione wasn't at dinner. He found the troll in the corridor outside the bathroom, 12 feet of grey muscle and primitive aggression, dragging its club. He stood in the corridor and looked at it, and the shadows of the corridor moved. They came up around the troll like walls, thick, dark, impenetrable, a shadow cage that closed before the troll fully registered that anything was happening. The creature battered at the shadow walls and found them solid as stone and battered again, and the shadows held because Harry was holding them, standing in the corridor with one hand slightly raised and an expression of concentration that looked from the outside like someone watching something mildly complicated. The troll exhausted itself against the walls and sat down, defeated and confused, and Harry held the cage until McGonagall and Snape arrived, Snape arriving slightly ahead, with the speed of someone who was already moving when the trouble started, and both of them stopped and looked at a 12-foot mountain troll sitting in a cage of solid darkness in the middle of a school corridor. Snape's eyes went to Harry. Harry looked back. The troll, Harry said, is contained. Hermione Granger is in the girls' bathroom, unharmed. Ron Weasley went to find Professor McGonagall. Snape said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, stand back, Potter. Harry stepped back. The shadow cage held until Snape had the troll stunned, and then Harry let it dissolve, the shadows bleeding back into the ordinary dark of the corridor as if they'd always just been shadows. McGonagall's expression was doing several things simultaneously. Snape's was doing fewer, but they were more complicated. Dumbledore arrived 2 minutes after, and looked at Harry with the careful, complex attention of a man who has been reading a letter one way and has just been informed by the letter itself that he's been misreading it. "Thank you, Harry," Dumbledore said. "Of course," Harry said. "You contained it quite effectively." "Yes," Harry said, and gave Dumbledore the same steady look he gave him across the Great Hall, and Dumbledore held it for a moment and then smiled, and it was a genuine smile, but it was also a thinking smile, the smile of someone recalibrating at speed. Hermione appeared from the bathroom, unharmed and with the particular expression of someone who has been listening to everything from a position of non-involvement and is deciding how much to say about it. She said nothing. She looked at Harry and Ron and the troll and the assembled professors and said, with perfect composure, "Thank you for coming," which could have meant several different things and was probably intended to mean all of them. Afterward, walking back toward Gryffindor Tower, Hermione beside him, Ron on his other side, still vibrating slightly with adrenaline, Ron said, "Okay." Harry said. "Okay," Ron said again. "Tell me." Harry glanced at him. Then at Hermione, who gave a small nod. "Tomorrow," Harry said. "All three of you. Tomorrow morning." "Neville too?" Hermione said. "He already knows some of it," Harry said. Ron threw his hands up slightly in the gesture of someone who has been the last to know something that everyone else apparently knew, and Harry said, "Tomorrow, Ron," and Ron muttered something largely incoherent but not actually hostile and let it go. He told them in the room of requirement. He'd found it in his first week shadow mapping, had used it several times already for training sessions with his Eternals. It was the most private space in the castle, it generated itself for need, and Harry's need was a room where he could show 3 11-year-olds something that would change how they understood the world, and the castle gave him exactly that, a warm room with deep chairs and walls that weren't quite solid, that breathed slightly, that had the quality of a place that existed slightly outside the ordinary. He told them about the Shadow Monarch. About the night at Godric's Hollow. About what woke up in him when the killing curse rebounded. He told them about the Shadow Domain and the Eternals and the 2-year-old in a cupboard under the stairs having conversations in the dark with his dead parents. He told them about his Eternals. And then he let them be there. James came through first, stepping out of the room's deep shadows with the ease of long practice, and stood in the warm light and looked at Ron and Hermione and Neville with his hands in his pockets and a smile that was still, unmistakably, James Potter. Ron made a sound that wasn't a word. Neville gripped the arms of his chair. Hermione went very still and then said, quietly, "You're really him." "James Potter," James confirmed. "Yes." Lily came next, and was simply present, warm and clear-eyed and real in a way that made the room feel fuller immediately. She looked at Hermione and said, "Thank you for being his friend," and Hermione, who was not someone who cried easily or publicly, made a very controlled effort not to. They stayed for an hour. James talked to Ron about Quidditch in a way that had Ron completely forgetting that he was talking to a dead man. Lily sat with Neville and asked about his grandmother, and what she'd been told about Doria, and Neville talked more easily than Harry had yet heard him talk, relaxed in a way that Hogwarts hadn't quite managed to make him yet. Hermione asked Charles about the battle tactics of the Shadow Domain with the focused intensity of someone who has found a primary source and is going to use it properly. Harry watched all of it and felt something he'd felt only in the Shadow Hall under the oak tree at Privet Drive, the feeling of being exactly in the right place with exactly the right people. A family that held people who came close to it. A court that could open to accept new members. After, when the Eternals had receded back into the shadows, the 3 living friends sat quietly in their chairs. Hermione spoke first. "Voldemort," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "You're going to let it play out until he goes for the stone." "Yes." "And then," she stopped. "And then I'm going to go meet him," Harry said. "And I'm going to end it." Ron looked at him steadily. "Alone?" "With my army," Harry said. 22 dead Potters, woven into every shadow of the castle. "Not alone. Never alone." "With us," Hermione said. "Not a question." Harry looked at the 3 of them. At Ron, who had decided to trust him and hadn't wavered. At Hermione, who had walked alongside him from the moment she understood what she was looking at. At Neville, who had known, quietly and without fuss, since that first day on the train. "With you," Harry said. Outside the room of requirement, Hogwarts breathed around them, enormous and old and layered, its shadows warm and full with the presence of an army that had been waiting a long time for this. Somewhere on the third floor, behind a locked door, a man with something terrible on the back of his head studied a corridor and looked for weaknesses in defenses that had been built by someone who didn't know the real threat had already walked in through the front door. Harry was going to let him think that a little longer. Just a little longer. Chapter 5, The Stone and the Shadow. The thing about a trap, Harry had learned from Charles, was that it only worked if the prey didn't know it was a trap. Quirrell didn't know. Harry had been watching him for 2 months, tracking his movements through the shadow network, mapping his access patterns to the third floor, cataloging the rhythm of his attempts at the defenses. Fluffy first, then the devil's snare, then the winged keys, each obstacle tested and probed in the small hours when Quirrell thought the castle was asleep. The man was thorough, Harry gave him that. And the thing on the back of his head was patient in the way that things which have survived their own death are patient, with the stretched, terrible patience of something that has been waiting so long that time itself has become meaningless. The voice Harry sometimes heard, at the edge of his shadow sense, threading through Quirrell's shadows like smoke through a keyhole, was not Voldemort performing. It was Voldemort planning. And that was more dangerous than the performance. December came. The castle filled with the specific energy of students approaching Christmas, the great hall going gold and red and green, the cold outside pressing against the windows. Harry moved through all of it with the settled attention of someone who is living fully in the present because the present contains everything that matters. He was doing 3 things simultaneously, finishing his first-term coursework at a level that had stopped surprising his professors and started making them curious, continuing the mapping of Hogwarts' shadow network, which had revealed 7 more rooms of interest and 1 passage that went somewhere he hadn't located the exit of yet, and maintaining his watch on Quirrell while preparing, with his Eternals and his 3 living friends, for what was coming. Ron left for the holidays. He'd invited Harry with the open generosity of someone who defaults to inclusion, and Harry had said no with genuine regret and the explanation that he had things to do at Hogwarts, which Ron accepted without pressing. Hermione stayed, which surprised no one who knew Hermione. Neville stayed because his grandmother was visiting an elderly friend and the Longbottom house would be empty. So 3 of them remained, and the castle thinned to its winter population of stragglers and staff, and the shadow network expanded into new rooms as students vacated them. Christmas morning, Harry woke to a small stack of presents at the foot of his bed. He looked at them for a moment. He hadn't expected much, he'd never had proper Christmases, not at the Dursleys, and he'd already exchanged gifts with his Eternals in the Shadow Hall the night before, which had been a long and occasionally chaotic evening involving Pericles attempting to explain the history of Yule celebrations across 4 centuries while James tried to teach Harry a card game Harry was already better at than he was. The presents were unexpected. Ron had sent something heavy and woolen, a Weasley jumper, as it turned out, dark green with a gold H, which Harry unfolded and put on immediately because it was warm and because it was from Ron, and those 2 things were sufficient. Hermione had sent a book, Advanced Shadow Theory in Pre-Hogwarts Magical Traditions, which she'd had to order from a specialist bookseller and which, based on her annotation in the front cover, "This doesn't mean I fully understand what you are yet, but I'm working on it." She'd read before sending. Neville had sent a small potted plant with a note explaining that it was a variety that bloomed in winter specifically and that his gran said Doria Potter had kept them in every room of Potter Manor. Harry held the plant for a while. Then there was one more, no tag, no label, just a small flat package wrapped in plain paper. Inside was an invisibility cloak. Silky and weightless and with that quality of fundamental absence he'd felt the first time he touched it in the Sovereign Vault, the quality of refusal to be seen. He already had the cloak. He was holding the cloak. He turned the package over. There was a small card inside. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. Use it well." Harry read the card twice. Then he folded the cloak back up and held it and thought about what this meant, that Dumbledore had his father's cloak, that he'd kept it, and that he was giving it now. A gesture of trust? A message? Or something more calculated, a reason for Harry to go wandering under an invisibility cloak, to go exploring where Dumbledore could monitor what he found and what he did with it. "He's watching what you do with the gift," Doria said, from the shadow by the window. She had the early morning expression of someone who hasn't slept because they don't sleep, and has been thinking undisturbed for hours. "I know," Harry said. "He wants to see if you go to the mirror." Harry looked at her. "What mirror?" "The mirror of Eriste," Doria said. "He's moved it to the castle. It's in one of the unused rooms on the 7th floor, I found it last week. He wants to see what you desire. What you want most. It would tell him how to manage you." Harry thought about this for a moment. "What do I want most?" Doria's expression, for the first time in his memory, went entirely unguarded. Just for a second. "I know what the mirror would show you," she said. "I think you know too." Harry looked at the jumper from Ron, the book from Hermione, the plant from Neville. He thought about Christmas evening in the Shadow Hall with his Eternals. "It wouldn't show me anything I don't already have," he said. Doria's expression returned to its usual precision, but something warm stayed in it. "No," she said. "I don't think it would." Harry put on his Weasley jumper and went to find Hermione for breakfast. Dumbledore called Harry to his office in the second week of January. Harry went. He climbed the moving staircase behind the gargoyle and knocked and entered when invited, and sat in the chair across from the headmaster's desk with his hands folded and his attention fully present. The office was extraordinary, his shadow sense told him that before his eyes did. Instruments on every surface, portraits of previous headmasters, a magnificently old shadow network accumulated through centuries of powerful magical occupants. And Fawkes, the phoenix, on his perch, who turned his head and looked at Harry with the golden eyes of something very old and not entirely comprehensible. Harry looked back at Fawkes. The phoenix made a soft sound, 2 notes, like the beginning of a song. Dumbledore watched this exchange with the expression of someone filing information. "Sit down, Harry," he said, though Harry was already sitting. The slip was minor, the instinct to direct someone who was already where they needed to be. Harry noted it without comment. "Thank you for the cloak," Harry said. "Your father's," Dumbledore said. "He would have wanted you to have it." A pause, genuine, Harry thought. There was real grief in Dumbledore when he spoke of James and Lily, which was the most honest thing about him. "Have you found it useful?" "I haven't used it yet," Harry said. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression, the adjustment of a man who expected one answer and received another. "I see," he said. "You found it sufficient to simply have it." "It's already mine," Harry said. "It's been mine since the night my father died. Having it in my hands rather than in a drawer somewhere is an improvement, but the ownership was never in question." A longer pause. Dumbledore's eyes, the legendary eyes, bright blue and full of the particular quality of intelligence that has been refining itself for over a century, were steady on him. "You're quite remarkable, Harry." "I understand you think so," Harry said. "I'd like to talk about the Philosopher's Stone." No reaction. None that was visible. "But in the shadow space," Charles said, very quietly, "there," and Harry saw what Charles saw, the almost imperceptible stilling of Dumbledore's hands on his desk. 2 inches of betrayed surprise in an otherwise perfect composure. "The stone," Dumbledore said. "I know it's here," Harry said. "I know Nicholas Flamel arranged to have it moved. I know it's behind the 3rd-floor corridor defenses." He paused. "I also know that Professor Quirrell is going to try to take it, and I know why, and I know what's on the back of his head underneath that turban." The office was very quiet. Fawkes made another soft sound. "How long," Dumbledore said, and his voice was perfectly level, "have you known?" "Since the 2nd week of term," Harry said. "And you didn't come to you?" Harry said. "I considered it." "But you already knew, Professor. You knew before term started. You built the defenses precisely because you expected Voldemort to try for the stone. You wanted him to try. You created the conditions for a confrontation." Dumbledore was silent. "I'm not criticizing the strategy," Harry said. "It's reasonable. You want him to commit to a physical attempt so you can respond. What I'm telling you is that I also have a plan, and my plan and your plan should probably not collide in a dark corridor at an inopportune moment." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Then he said, slowly, "You're 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said. "And you're describing a tactical assessment of a situation I've been monitoring for 5 months." Harry met his eyes. "I'm not asking for permission, Professor. I'm giving you information as a courtesy and asking you to extend the same courtesy." The portraits on the walls were listening. Fawkes was listening. The instruments on Dumbledore's shelves made their small soft sounds into the silence. "What is your plan, Harry?" Dumbledore said finally. "I'm going to let Quirrell take the stone to the final chamber," Harry said. "I'm going to be there when he does. And I'm going to end it." "End it," Dumbledore said. "Voldemort is not going to stop," Harry said. "He's going to keep coming back, he'll find another host, another method, another attempt. The stone isn't the objective. I am the objective, and we both know it. So we address it directly." He paused. "I can do things in a confrontation that you cannot, Professor. Things that are specifically relevant to what Voldemort is." A very long silence. "You're asking me," Dumbledore said carefully, "to let you walk into a confrontation with Voldemort." "I'm asking you," Harry said, "to not walk in first and remove my opportunity." More silence. "I could simply," Dumbledore began. "Remove the stone tonight," Harry said. "Yes. And Voldemort retreats, and spends the next several years rebuilding, and comes back stronger and better prepared. Or." He paused. "You let the trap run. And it ends here." He met the old blue eyes without flinching, without hurry, without any of the deference that Dumbledore was accustomed to receiving from every person in this office, and he waited. Dumbledore said, "If anything goes wrong, I'll send for you," Harry said. "Through the shadows." "You can do that?" "I can do many things," Harry said. Another silence. Fawkes sang his two-note phrase again, and this time it sounded like something settling into place. "Very well," Dumbledore said. And then, very quietly, in the voice of someone making a genuine acknowledgement, "Your father would have said something very like this. Except he would have been considerably less organized about it." "I know," Harry said. "I've heard the stories." He stood, nodded, not a bow, a peer's acknowledgement, and left. In the shadow space, James was making a sound that was somewhere between pride and helpless laughter. Harry didn't say anything, but the shadow domain, his domain, pulsed once with warmth. He told them that evening. The room of requirement gave them a war room, a long table, maps Harry had drawn of the third-floor corridor and its chambers, light from no visible source. Hermione and Neville sat across from him. The Eternals distributed through the room's shadows, present but giving the living their space. "Quirrell makes his move at the end of term," Harry said. He didn't know the exact date, but the shadow signature had been building, more urgent, more frequent in the last 2 weeks, Voldemort's patience fraying against the calendar. "Before the summer. He's running out of time to try." "How do you know?" Neville said. "He's changing the rhythm of his approaches to the third floor. He's been systematic all term, testing the defenses on a rotation. Now he's hitting them every night. He's looking for a gap." Harry paused. "He's found one in Fluffy. He knows about the music, I don't know how." "Hagrid," Hermione said, with the expression of someone who hates being right about something. "He's too trusting. Someone got it out of him." "Probably," Harry said. "It doesn't matter. What matters is the sequence: Fluffy, the devil's snare, the winged keys, the chess set, the troll, already dealt with in there. Actually, there's one stunned, the potion riddle, and then the final chamber." "6 tasks," Hermione said. The first two are straightforward if you understand the mechanics: music for Fluffy, fire and light for the snare. The keys require a broom, which, he glanced at Neville. I can't fly, Neville said, not with shame, just as a fact. You won't need to, Harry said. I'll handle the keys. Hermione, the potion riddle is logic, you'll have it in under 2 minutes. The chess set is the hard one. Hermione looked at him. For you. It's Ron's game, Harry said. Ron's at home. He'll be back before it happens, Harry said. I told you, Quirrell hasn't moved yet. We have time. And the final chamber? Neville said. Harry was quiet for a moment. The final chamber is mine. Harry, Hermione started. I'm not being heroic, he said. I'm being practical. What's in the final chamber is Voldemort, and Voldemort is specifically my problem in a way that's different from a general threat. What I can do in that room, he stopped and looked at them both. I need you to trust me on this part. Hermione studied him. Are you going to be all right? Yes, Harry said. You're sure? I'm sure. She looked at him for 3 more seconds, making a decision the way she made decisions, with her whole attention, nothing held back, the full weight of Hermione Granger's considerable intelligence brought to bear on a single question. Then she nodded. All right. Neville said, simply, what do we do while you're in there? Make sure no one else comes through, Harry said. Professors, students, anyone. The corridor needs to be clear from the outside. We can do that, Neville said. I know you can, Harry said. Quirrell made his move on a Tuesday night in late May. Harry felt at the moment it started, the shadow network shift as something large and warm went to sleep on the 3rd floor, a heavy dog consciousness settling into musical unconsciousness. He was already awake. He'd been sleeping lightly for the past week, his shadow sense spread thin through the castle, waiting. He got up. Dressed. Put the Elder Wand in his sleeve where it sat like an extension of his arm, which it was. He reached into the shadow space and felt his army, 22 Eternals, distributed through the castle's shadows, ready. Not yet, he told them. Stay back. I want to do this first part myself. He went into the corridor first, because he wanted to know where everyone was before he moved. Hermione had her plan. Neville had his. They drilled it 3 times and both of them were solid under pressure in their own ways, Hermione through the force of her preparation, Neville through something quieter that had been building since the night Harry helped him turn a match to a needle. He went through the door. The 3rd floor corridor was cold and quiet and smelled of large animal. Fluffy was asleep across the trapdoor, head on his 3 chins, a small charmed music box playing softly nearby. Quirrell's work. Harry stepped over 2 of Fluffy's enormous paws and opened the trapdoor and dropped. Devil's snare, he dissolved into shadow before it could close around him and emerged on the other side in the same motion, taking about 3 seconds total. The plant's shadows were irritated at being moved through, he felt it like a brief resistance. He apologized to it, which he meant sincerely, and moved on. The key room was huge and high-ceilinged and full of the flutter of hundreds of winged keys catching the light of the torches. The correct key was the old-fashioned one with a broken wing. He'd mapped this room months ago, had looked at every shadow in it, had noted the key with the bent wing because it moved differently from the others, slightly erratic, compensating. He reached his awareness into the shadows near the ceiling and felt the key's shadow and pulled it down gently and caught it and unlocked the door. 2 minutes total. The chess room. McGonagall's contribution, and it showed, the chessmen were enormous and clearly enchanted with the kind of care that people put into things they're genuinely proud of. They stood on their squares in the dim light and waited. Harry looked at the board. He sat down and studied it. Chess wasn't his strongest game, that was Doria's domain, she'd taught him, but she'd also told him plainly that raw spatial intelligence and game theory could get you through most positions if you were patient and ruthless about sacrificing pieces that weren't going to win the game for you. He played. It took 20 minutes and he sacrificed the rook and the queen's knight and the other rook, and the king's bishop made a move that opened a path and the opponent's king tipped over with the particular solid sound of a chess piece that has genuinely been beaten. He moved through the door. The troll was already unconscious. Someone had stunned it properly this time, months ago, he now realized, as part of the trap's design. Someone on the staff. The potion room. 6 bottles, a logic puzzle burned into a piece of parchment. He read it once, had the answer in 90 seconds, drank the smallest bottle, went through the black flame. And stopped. He was in the final chamber. It was a long, torchlit room, and at its far end was the mirror of Eriste, the same mirror Doria had told him about, now repurposed, now serving as the mechanism for the stone itself. Quirinus Quirrell was standing in front of it. He turned when Harry came through the fire. His face did several things in rapid sequence: surprise, fear, a kind of desperate calculation. The turban was slightly looser than usual, or maybe Harry was seeing it more clearly now, feeling the shadow signature of what was underneath at close range for the first time. "You," Quirrell said. "Me," Harry agreed. He walked into the room at an even pace and stopped 12 feet from Quirrell. He was not in a hurry. He had all the time there was. "You shouldn't be here," Quirrell said. "You're 11 years old, you keep saying that like it's supposed to change something," Harry said. "Where's the stone?" Quirrell's expression shifted. The fear was still there but something was overriding it, the other consciousness, pressing forward. The voice that came next was not quite Quirrell's, "He doesn't have it yet." 2 voices at once, layered, Quirrell's thin tenor underneath something deeper and colder. "The mirror doesn't give it to him. It shows only Voldemort," Harry said. "Hello." A pause. "You're not afraid," said the layered voice. It wasn't a question. It had the quality of something finding what it expected to find and not being pleased by it. "No," Harry said. "You should be." The voice was doing the thing dark magic voices did, pressing at the edges of awareness, trying to find the place where authority becomes intimidating. Harry felt it as pressure and noted it and set it aside. "I killed your parents. I killed a dozen families before yours." "I will, you keep saying will," Harry observed. "But here you are. Sharing a body with a man who stutters when he's nervous. Without a form of your own. Without the stone yet." He tilted his head slightly. "I'd use did and have more carefully if I were you. They're different from will." Absolute silence. Then Quirrell's hand came up with his wand, the motion fast, practiced, genuinely skilled, and Harry was no longer where he'd been. He stepped through the shadow under the nearest torch bracket and came out 3 feet to Quirrell's left, and the curse that had been aimed at where he was impacted the floor and took a chunk of stone with it. "Accio stone," Quirrell said, whirling, aiming at the mirror, and Harry felt the stone move, felt it the way he felt all objects connected to the deep shadow domain, felt it respond to the summoning. He held it in place. Not with his wand. With the domain. The stone was a deathly hallow, and the hallows were his, and the mirror might be Dumbledore's mechanism but the stone was not going to move unless Harry allowed it to move. Quirrell staggered. His wand shook with the effort of a summoning that wasn't summoning. "What, the stone doesn't respond to you," Harry said. "It responds to me. It always has." He held out his hand and the mirror did something impossible. The stone appeared on the surface of the glass and slid through it and dropped into Harry's palm like it had been waiting. Warm. Heavy. Red in the torchlight. He looked at it for a moment. Then closed his hand and put it in his pocket. "Give it to me," Quirrell said. Both voices now, layered so thick that one barely sounded like Quirrell anymore. "Give it to me or I will destroy you where you stand. You've tried to destroy me twice," Harry said. "Twice, as an infant. Not ideal results." He raised the Elder Wand. He hadn't used it in combat before, had trained with it, had understood it, but had never brought it to bear on something like this. The moment he raised it, the shadow domain responded. Not a shift this time, a surge, enormous and immediate, every shadow in every room of Hogwarts deepening simultaneously, the network expanding, Harry's awareness blazing through the entire castle in one terrible clear pulse. Quirrell felt it. He stepped back, and for the first time the Voldemort voice went silent, and only Quirrell's voice remained, thin and frightened. What are you? I am the Shadow Monarch, Harry said. He said it the way you say your own name, without performance, just as a fact about yourself. The heir of Ignotus Peverell. The master of the Deathly Hallows. And the sovereign of every shadow in this room. He let that settle for one breath. You're standing in my domain. The shadows moved. They came from the walls and the floor and the dark places behind the torches, thick and silver-edged and purposeful, and they wrapped around Quirrell's feet and legs and he couldn't move, not because they were heavy but because they were present, the absolute presence of the shadow domain making the physical world briefly negotiable in its terms rather than its own. Quirrell screamed and fought it and the Voldemort consciousness surged forward, and the turban fell away. Harry saw it. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was wrong in every way that mattered, not a face so much as the memory of a face, chalk-white and red-eyed and burning with the particular desperation of something that has survived its own death through methods that were never supposed to work. It turned toward Harry with those red eyes and what it saw in Harry's expression made it go very, very still. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. Just Harry's name, said the way a general says the name of a battlefield he's lost before. You know what I am, Harry said. I know what you think you are, Voldemort said. The voice from the back of Quirrell's head was strange, it had the depth of the dark in it, which Harry recognized because he lived in the dark, and underneath the power was something tightly controlled that was very close to fear. You're a child. You keep saying that, Harry said, and yet here we are. He took a step forward. Quirrell scrambled, couldn't move his legs, tried to drag himself backward with his arms, and Voldemort's face on the back of his head tracked Harry with the fixed attention of something that cannot afford to look away. The stone, Voldemort said. The fear was gone from his voice, replaced by something colder and more dangerous, reason. Voldemort negotiating was Voldemort at his most dangerous, and Harry knew it. The stone is nothing to you. You don't need it. Give it to me and I will, offer me something I want. Harry said. What do I want, Voldemort? A pause. Power. I have power. Recognition. Respect. I have those too, Harry said pleasantly. From people whose respect means something. He thought briefly of Sharpclaw. Of Ignotus. Of 22 dead Potters kneeling in the Shadow Hall the night they understood what they were serving. Then what do you want, child? Voldemort said. I want the boundary to hold, Harry said. He was 3 feet from Quirrell now. The boundary between living and dead that you've been tearing at since before I was born. The Horcruxes, the half-life you've been living in, the fragments of yourself scattered through objects, all of it is damage to something that isn't supposed to be damaged. He paused. I'm the sovereign. Maintaining the boundary is my function. You are a violation of that boundary. You can't kill me, Voldemort said. I've made myself unkillable, you made yourself unhealable, Harry corrected. There's a difference. You can't die cleanly because you've broken yourself into pieces. But each piece can be unmade. He met the red eyes. The piece in Quirrell is the last large piece you have free. The others are in objects. I'll find them. But you've been walking around in this man for a year, using him up, and he's almost gone. He paused. Can you feel it? He's almost nothing left. Something crossed Quirrell's visible face, the real Quirrell, somewhere under all of it, and Harry saw what he hadn't been quite sure of, the man was still in there. Reduced, frightened, complicit but not entirely lost. Quirrell, Harry said. The eyes on the front of the head blinked. I know you can hear me, Harry said. I know you know what he is and what he's done to you. You know he's going to discard you the moment the stone is in his hands. Ignore him, Voldemort said. When did you stop wanting this? Harry said to Quirrell. Somewhere in the last year. Somewhere between the dark forest and the back of your own head. You stopped wanting it. Quirrell's eyes were doing something, trying to move, trying to communicate through the occupation of his own face, and Harry saw it clearly. He reached into the shadow domain and did something he'd never done before. He touched the connection between Quirrell and Voldemort. Not through a spell. Not through the Elder Wand, though the wand amplified it. Through the Sovereign's authority over the boundary between living and dead, because what Voldemort was doing to Quirrell was exactly that, keeping one foot in the living world through the vehicle of another man's body, violating the boundary, wrong in the deep fundamental way that the shadow domain recognized and rejected. He severed it. The sound it made wasn't audible. It was felt, in every shadow of the room, in the stone of the walls, in the mirror at the far end that had shown Harry only his family when he'd finally looked into it briefly, privately, in January. The connection between Quirrell and Voldemort tore, and Voldemort's consciousness, separated from its vehicle, was suddenly exposed. Not in a physical body. Not anchored. Floating in the space between the living world and the domain, and in the domain Harry was sovereign, and the domain did not welcome violations. Voldemort's voice, freed from Quirrell's head, became something formless, a sound that filled the room without a source, rage and desperation compressed into noise. You cannot, I'm not killing you, Harry said, into the formless sound. You've already done too good a job of making that complicated for yourself. But I can bind you. He raised the Elder Wand. Back into the dark. Into the part of the boundary where the unmade things live. Where the Horcruxes go when they're destroyed and where you'll go when they're all gone. He paused. You'll know when the last one goes. You'll feel it. I will find a way, you always do, Harry said. That's why I'm not finished yet. He met the formless presence the way he met everything, directly, without flinching, with the settled certainty of someone who knows exactly where they stand. But today you're going back. He brought the Elder Wand down. The shadow domain opened. Not the sealed door, that was still waiting, still patient. A different opening, the boundary itself, the thin permeable membrane between the living world and the domain, pulled wide by the Sovereign's authority and the power of the wand in concert, a gap that the formless, bodiless, scattered fragments of Voldemort's presence were pulled toward the way water is pulled toward a drain. Voldemort fought it. Of course he did, the man had survived his own death through sheer refusal, and refusal was his primary talent. He fought with everything he had left, which was less than Harry had thought and more than he'd hoped. Harry held the opening. 22 Eternals in the shadow space braced against the force of it, lending their substance to the Sovereign's will. He felt them, James at his shoulder, Charles at his back, Ignotus at the deep end of the domain holding the boundary open from the inside. The whole court of House Potter, living and dead, present and committed. Voldemort went into the dark. Not dead. Not destroyed. Pushed back, contained, separated from the living world by the Sovereign's authority rather than by the impossible method of a soul-fracturing curse. He'd find his way back, Harry had said as much, and he meant it, but it would take time, and time was what Harry needed to find the Horcruxes and end it properly. The room went quiet. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him before he hit the floor, quick, instinctive, the same motion he'd used to catch Colin's Remembrall. He lowered him to the stone floor and knelt beside him and looked at a man who was, up close, in very bad condition. The year of occupation had taken almost everything Quirrell had to give. Quirrell, Harry said. The man's eyes opened. They were his own again, light brown, exhausted, full of something that was probably shame. I'm so, he stopped. Don't, Harry said. Not right now. He put his hand on Quirrell's shoulder. The skin was cold, too cold, the damage Voldemort's presence had done was physical as well as everything else. But it was human cold, not the wrong cold of the occupied man Harry had been tracking all year. "The stone," Quirrell said. "I was going to, I would have, you didn't," Harry said. "I would have," Quirrell said. His voice was very small. "But you didn't," Harry said. He said it not as comfort, not as empty reassurance, but as a fact. What you do is what you are. What you don't do also matters. Quirrell. "Look at me." The man looked at him. Harry was an 11-year-old kneeling on a stone floor in a Weasley jumper and robes, and he held Quirrell's gaze with the full weight of what he was, and he said, "You're going to need care. A lot of care. I don't know if what he did to you is fully reversible, but I know people who might." "Euphemia," said James, from the shadow space. "She'll know. Someone I trust is going to look at you," Harry said. "But first, Dumbledore is going to come through that door very soon and he's going to have questions, and the most important thing you can tell him is the truth." A pause. "Can you do that?" Quirrell's expression was complicated, the expression of someone who has been lying for so long that truth feels like a foreign gesture. Then it simplified. "Yes," he said. "Good," Harry said. He straightened and stood and looked at the mirror at the far end of the room. In it, very clearly, surrounded by 22 dead faces that were also family faces, an 11-year-old boy with a lightning bolt scar stood with a green and gold jumper and shadows in his eyes and his parents at his shoulders. He reached into the mirror's reflection with the shadow sense, just briefly, just to check, and Lily said, from his shoulder, "You were wonderful." "I know," he said, because he was Harry, but he said it with a smile that was completely private and completely real. The sound of footsteps came from the other side of the black fire, multiple sets, moving fast. Harry turned to face the door, put his hands in his pockets, felt the weight of the Philosopher's Stone in his right hand and the Elder Wand in his left, and waited. The black fire dissolved. Dumbledore came through first, and stopped when he saw the room. Snape was one step behind him, and stopped too, and his face when he looked at Harry did the thing it had been doing all year, the complicated recalibration, the discarding of a frame, the painful replacing of it with something that fit the evidence better. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor," Harry said. He took the stone from his pocket and crossed the room and put it on the headmaster's palm. "You should take this somewhere he genuinely can't follow. Not a school." Dumbledore looked at the stone in his hand. Then at Quirrell on the floor. Then at Harry. "What happened?" he said. Harry told him. Not all of it, not the Shadow Monarch, not the Eternals, not the Elder Wand in his sleeve, but enough. The binding. The separation from Quirrell. Voldemort pushed back into the domain. Dumbledore listened. His expression, across the length of that telling, moved through several things and settled into something Harry hadn't seen on his face before, a kind of quiet, where a man who has been certain of many things for a very long time sits in the unexpected space between certainties. "He'll be back," Harry said. "We both know it." "Yes," Dumbledore said. Then, very carefully, "but not tonight." "Not tonight," Harry agreed. Snape said nothing. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was finally, after a full year of complicated glances and compressed reaction, completely legible. It was the expression of a man who loved Lily Evans, who had always loved Lily Evans, looking at the thing she had died to protect, and understanding, perhaps for the first time, that she had known something he hadn't. That the child she'd refused to step aside from had been worth every impossible thing she'd done. He turned and left without a word. Harry watched him go. "He'll be all right," James said, from somewhere in the shadow space, with the complicated generosity of a man making peace with something that had always been between them. "Yes," Harry said quietly. "I think he will." Chapter 6. The weight of the crown. The hospital wing at 2 in the morning had a specific quality of quiet that Harry had come to associate with aftermath, the particular hush of a place where things had already happened and were now being processed. Madame Pomfrey had fussed over him for 20 minutes, found nothing physically wrong, and then gone to attend to Quirrell, which was a considerably larger project. Harry sat on a bed near the window with the curtains open and looked at the grounds below, the lake dark and still, the forbidden forest a black edge against a slightly less black sky, the grounds enormous and sleeping. His Eternals settled around him in the shadows of the ward. Not crowded, they understood space, understood when to be present and when to simply be near. James sat on the bed beside him. Not speaking. Just there. Harry looked at the grounds and breathed. He was tired in a way he hadn't been before, not physically, not in his limbs or his eyes, but somewhere underneath that, somewhere in the shadow domain itself, a deep tiredness that came from holding something enormous open and then closing it again. Like a muscle used hard for the first time. It would be stronger for it. But tonight it was tired. You should sleep, James said. I know, Harry said. He didn't move. But you're not going to. Not yet. James was quiet. Then, you did well tonight. I know, Harry said again. Not arrogance, just the same steady accuracy he applied to everything. He had done well. He was allowed to know that. He'll come back. I know, Harry said a third time. The Horcruxes, I know, Dad. James stopped. There was a brief silence, and in it something passed between them, the compressed acknowledgement of everything that was still ahead, the hunting, the destroying, the finishing of a war that had been technically over for 10 years but had never really ended. The work that waited. But not tonight, James said. No, Harry said. Not tonight. They sat together in the hospital wing quiet, father and son, living and dead, until the sky outside started doing the slow thing it did before dawn, not lightning, just becoming a slightly different quality of dark. Then Harry lay down and closed his eyes and slept. The morning brought Hermione and Neville at 7 sharp. They came through the door together with the energy of people who have been awake since before dawn and have been waiting as long as social acceptability permitted. Hermione was carrying books, which she'd apparently brought on reflex. Neville had Trevor. Harry was sitting up when they arrived, eating the breakfast Pomfrey had brought him with the practical efficiency of someone refueling. Well? Hermione said. He's gone, Harry said. Back into the dark. Not destroyed, I explained why, but contained. For now. She sat down in the chair beside his bed and looked at him with the careful attention of someone taking inventory of a person rather than a situation. Are you all right? Tired, Harry said. That's all. That's all. She looked unconvinced but accepted it. Neville sat on the opposite chair and Trevor made a bid for freedom that Neville caught reflexively without looking. Quirrell. Neville said. Pomfrey's got him, Harry said. She's good. But I want Euphemia to look at him too. He paused. I'm going to ask Dumbledore for a private room where, he stopped. Where your Eternals can work. Hermione said. Yes. She nodded and opened her book, which turned out to be the sole magic text she'd been working through all term, now heavily annotated in her precise small handwriting. I found something, she said. Last night, while everything was happening. I couldn't sleep so I kept reading. She turned to a page she'd marked. Soul anchoring. The principle that Horcruxes use, the tethering of a soul fragment to an object, it has a counter. An unanchoring. If you can identify the tether point and access the soul fragment directly, a sovereign can dissolve the anchor entirely. Harry looked at her. Show me. She passed him the book and he read the passage, and while he read it he felt the shadow domain respond, the theory connecting to practice the way good theory always did, clicking into place like a key in a lock. This is right, he said. I know it's right, she said. The question is whether you can do it without destroying the object. Why would I want to preserve the object? Because some of them might be irreplaceable historical artifacts, she said, with the particular pained expression of someone who loves knowledge and hates that knowledge can be used for terrible things. A diadem, possibly. A cup. A locket. She paused. A diary. Harry looked at her. You found them. I found the list, she corrected. Or the partial list. Dumbledore's been researching this too. I found references in 3 separate history texts to objects connected to Voldemort's early career. He was collecting founder artifacts. Hogwarts connections. She pulled a separate piece of parchment from between the book's pages, her own handwriting, a list of 6 objects with notes beside each. This is what I have so far. I'm missing 2. Harry looked at the list. Then he reached into the shadow domain, into the deep dark where the Horcrux taint registered as a specific wrong note, and counted. 7, he said. 7 objects total. 6 objects and himself, Harry said. Himself is the 7th, he put a piece into himself accidentally, I think, the night the killing curse rebounded. The fragment that's in, he stopped, because the next sentence was going to be complicated. Hermione looked at him. Her eyes moved to his scar. Oh, she said very quietly. Yes, Harry said. The scar. The scar. Neville had been listening with the careful attention of someone who is following a complex conversation and keeping up. He said, can that be, fixed, Harry said. Yes. But not yet. The fragment is dormant because he's dormant. If I remove it while he's contained in the dark, it doesn't strengthen him, the fragment just dissolves. But the timing matters. He paused. Hermione. The list. How quickly do you think we can locate the objects? She looked at her parchment. The diary I'm fairly confident about. Borgin and Burke's, early records, there are purchase logs that Gringotts might have access to. The locket is possibly at the Black family house. The cup, slowly, Harry said. We have time. He's contained. For how long? Long enough, Harry said. A year, maybe more. His ability to move in the living world is essentially 0 right now, no body, no anchor point. He'll find a host eventually. Animals first, probably, then, he'll be looking for another weak point. Another quarrel. He paused. We use the time. Hermione made a note. She was already 3 steps ahead, he could see it, already organizing a research plan with the same systematic efficiency she brought to coursework, except that this coursework had rather higher stakes. We tell Dumbledore, Harry said. She looked up. About the Horcruxes? About the list. About what I know. Not everything, not the domain, not the Hallows, but enough for him to be useful. He thought about the conversation in the headmaster's office, Dumbledore's expression when he adjusted, when he recalibrated. The man was genuinely brilliant when he wasn't letting his certainties get ahead of his intelligence. He's been researching this independently. If we combine what we know, we find them faster. You trust him with this? Neville said. Harry considered the question honestly. I trust his intentions on this specific point, he said. He wants Voldemort gone. That aligns with what I want. On other things, he paused. On other things, I'm more careful. Neville nodded. He understood the distinction. The door to the hospital wing opened and Pomfrey appeared, looked at the 3 of them with the professional suspicion of a woman who has seen many unauthorized early morning ward visits, and said, Mr. Potter needs rest. I'm fine, Harry said. You'll be finer with rest, Pomfrey said, in the tone of a woman who has been having this conversation with Potters since before Harry's parents were born and has never yet lost it. Harry conceded the point and ate the rest of his breakfast and let Hermione and Neville go, and lay back down, and thought about 7 Horcruxes and a bounded fragment of Voldemort and the work that was waiting. Then he thought about Ron, who didn't know any of this yet and was going to have a great deal to catch up on when the train brought him back. He smiled at the ceiling and fell asleep. Dumbledore came at 10. He came alone, without the half-dozen subtle signals of authority that he usually carried into rooms, without the robes arranged just so, without the particular way he positioned himself that said this is my space. He came in and sat in the chair Hermione had vacated and put his hands together and looked at Harry with eyes that were doing something unusual. They were just looking. Not calculating. Not presenting. Just seeing. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Better," Harry said. He'd slept 2 hours and felt the deep tiredness of the shadow domain retreating to manageable. "I need to tell you some things." "I suspected you might," Dumbledore said. "About Voldemort's method of survival," Harry said. "Specifically, about how he divided himself to prevent permanent death." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, Horcruxes. "You know," Harry said. "I've suspected, for some time," Dumbledore said. "The evidence pointed toward it but I lacked confirmation." He paused. "How long have you known?" "I can feel them," Harry said simply. "In the shadow domain." A specific wrong note. "I counted 7 anchor points, 6 objects and one that's more complicated." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. That is more than I had estimated." "The magical cost alone of creating 7, he was willing to pay it," Harry said. "That's always been the thing about him, hasn't it? He's willing to pay any cost." "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "That has always been his particular characteristic." He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet Harry saw something in his face that wasn't the headmaster and wasn't the political figure and wasn't the legend. Just an old man who had spent decades fighting something that kept refusing to be finished. "You said 6 objects. Can you identify them?" Harry pulled out Hermione's list and passed it to him. Dumbledore looked at it for a long time. His expression moved through several things. At one point his eyes closed briefly. When they opened again they were very steady. "Miss Granger's work," he said. "Hers and mine," Harry said. He stopped. "This is excellent work, Harry. Both of you." He said it without the patronizing overlay that adults often put on compliments to children. He said it with the directness of someone acknowledging a peer's contribution. "The diary is, yes, I believe you're right. A Malfoy connection." He paused. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Harry said. "Hermione extrapolated from purchase records. She's very thorough." "She is," Dumbledore agreed. He looked at the list again. "The 7th. You said it was more complicated." "Yes," Harry said. "Will you tell me what it is?" Harry looked at him steadily. "Eventually," he said. "When the timing is right." Dumbledore held his gaze. The recalibration was visible again, that adjustment, that accommodation of a reality that didn't match expectations, and then he nodded, once. "I see," he said. "Not happy about it. But not pushing. You'll tell me when you're ready." "I'll tell you when it's necessary," Harry said. "Which is a different thing, but in this case they'll coincide." A pause. Then Dumbledore said, "You know I've been managing this situation, your situation, in ways that you may have found. You were working with the information you had," Harry said. "And the person you expected to find." He paused. "I'm not angry about it. But I need you to understand that the management is over." Silence. "I'm not your instrument," Harry said. Not harshly, as a fact, delivered clearly. "I'm not the boy who lived in the sense you've been using it. I'm not a symbol to be positioned or a variable to be controlled. I'm Harry Potter, and I have a specific relationship with the things that are trying to end Voldemort's ability to harm the living world, and that relationship doesn't require your intermediation." He held the old man's eyes. "What it does require is your knowledge and your access and your experience. And I'd like those, willingly given, as a working partnership." The room was very quiet. Fawkes wasn't here, this wasn't Dumbledore's office, but Harry felt the absence of the phoenix the way you feel the absence of something warm. He kept his eyes steady. "A partnership," Dumbledore said slowly. "Between two people who want the same thing," Harry said. With honesty about what we each know and what we each can do. Dumbledore looked at his hands. At the list. Back at Harry. And Harry watched the old man do something he suspected Albus Dumbledore had not done in a very long time, consider whether he was wrong about the most important thing in his current strategic picture. "I owe you an apology," Dumbledore said finally. Quietly, and with the specificity of someone who means what they say and knows the difference between meaning it and performing it. "For the years at Privet Drive. For the administrative control over the estate, I was told your lordship claim surprised the Gringotts staff considerably. For making assumptions about what you were and what you needed without," he stopped. "Without asking you." Harry looked at him for a moment. "I accept that," he said. "And I'll tell you something in return." He paused. "You're the most strategically sophisticated person I've met in the living world. If you stop trying to manage me and start working with me, we finish this faster and with less collateral damage than either of us would manage alone." Dumbledore blinked. Something moved in his face that was almost humor. "That is possibly the most efficiently delivered compliment I've ever received." "It was also a tactical observation," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I noticed that." He was quiet for a moment. "Very well, Harry. A partnership." He extended his hand. Harry shook it. The handshake lasted exactly as long as a handshake should and no longer, and when it was done they were something different, not quite friends, not yet, but something with more honesty in it than what they'd been before. The end of term feast happened. Harry sat at it and ate properly and watched the house points go up, Gryffindor winning, which made Ron, who was back from the holiday with a sunburn and a bag of Weasley home cooking and a great many questions that Harry answered in the shadow space of the dormitory at midnight, make a sound that rattled the dormitory windows. Snape was at the staff table. He looked at Harry once during the feast, just once, a direct look that lasted exactly 3 seconds, and Harry looked back, and something passed between them that wasn't reconciliation and wasn't friendship and wasn't forgiveness in either direction. It was more like mutual acknowledgement. An agreement that the complicated thing was complicated and would remain so, but that the complicated thing also contained something worth not destroying. After the feast, late, Harry went to the hospital wing. Quirrell was there, had been there since the night of the confrontation. Pomfrey's work combined with Euphemia's had been doing considerable good, the man was coherent now, could sit up, had some color back. The wrongness of the occupation was fading, slowly, the way wrongness does when it's removed from a person rather than a place, it leaves something empty that has to be rebuilt. Harry pulled the chair to beside his bed. Quirrell looked at him with the expression of someone who has been thinking about this conversation and is still not fully prepared for it. "You don't have to say anything," Harry said. "I should," Quirrell said. His voice was still slightly rough, it might always be slightly rough, Euphemia wasn't certain. "I should explain, I was afraid of him. When I was in Albania, researching, and he was there, in the forest, and I know what he does," Harry said. "He finds the fear and sits in it." Quirrell looked at him. "You're 11. Everyone says that," Harry said. "It's rather, I know," Harry said. Quirrell. "What do you want to do? When you're better?" The question surprised him, Harry could see it, the surprise of someone who has been in crisis long enough that they've stopped thinking in terms of want. I don't, teaching," Harry said. "Is it something you liked before?" Quirrell thought about it. "The theory," he said slowly. "The academic side. I was never particularly," he stopped. "I was afraid of the students," he said, with the quiet shame of someone admitting something they've never said aloud. "They could tell. First years could tell. That I was anxious," Harry said. "Terrified," Quirrell said. "And you thought going after Voldemort would cure that," Harry said. Quirrell looked at him. "You knew that." "I guessed," Harry said. It was the part that made sense. Not evil, just catastrophically wrong-headed. He paused. The academic side. There are institutions, research positions, archival work. Things that don't require you to manage a room full of 11-year-olds. He reached into his robe pocket and produced a card. A Gringotts correspondence card, the kind that could carry messages to and from the bank's extensive professional network. When you're better. When you've had time to think. Write to this address. There's a research position at the Department of Mysteries I know about. The kind of person they need is someone with your specific theoretical knowledge. Quirrell stared at the card. How do you know about, Lord Potter has access to records that Mr. Potter didn't, Harry said. You're the Potter Lord. You're 11, people keep noting that, Harry said. He stood. Get some rest. Euphemia will be back tomorrow. He paused. She'll present as a visitor. A relative of mine. Don't ask too many questions about her. He left Quirrell holding the card and looking at it with the expression of someone who has been given something small and specific to hold on to and is holding it. The train back to London. Harry sat in their compartment, his and Ron's and Hermione's and Neville's, and looked at the Scottish countryside unreeling outside the window, green and dramatic in the June light, and felt the year behind him the way you feel a completed thing, with the particular satisfaction that comes from work done well and problems addressed directly. Ron was telling a story about his brothers that required a great deal of arm movement and was making Neville laugh, a genuine laugh, fuller than anything Neville had produced in September, the laugh of someone who has found a place where they're allowed to be themselves. Hermione had her book open and was reading, which didn't prevent her from occasionally interjecting corrections to Ron's story with the comfort of someone who has spent a year learning exactly how much Ron can have his stories interrupted before he minds. Harry watched all of it and thought about the year. Voldemort, contained. The stone, destroyed, Dumbledore had confirmed it that morning, Nicholas Flamel had agreed, both of them accepting the logic that a stone Voldemort had already located and nearly reached was no longer secure regardless of where it was kept. 6 Horcruxes to find. 1 in his scar, dormant and untroublesome for now. A partnership with Dumbledore that had more honesty in it than anything they'd managed in the previous decade. Quirrell recovering. Snape, complicated, but oriented. And here, in a train compartment, 3 living people who knew what he was and hadn't flinched. Harry, Ron said, breaking out of his story. What are you thinking? Nothing much, Harry said. Ron gave him the look he developed over the course of the year, the Ron Weasley skeptical face that meant I know that's not true and I know you know I know that, but I'm not going to push it. All right. Good year, Harry said. Ron considered this with the thoroughness it deserved. We nearly got killed by a mountain troll, our defense teacher had Voldemort on his head, and you apparently, he looked at Hermione, who looked at Neville, who looked at Harry. Stopped Voldemort from getting what he wanted, Harry completed. Right, Ron said. Good year. He said it with the completely straight face of a Weasley, which meant it could have been entirely sarcastic or entirely sincere or most likely both simultaneously. Better than last year, Neville offered. What happened last year? Hermione said. Nothing, Neville said. That was sort of the problem. Harry laughed. It was the real one, the completely unguarded one that he'd learned he could give to these 3, that he didn't have to manage or contain. It came out of him and filled the compartment and Ron grinned and Hermione looked up from her book and Neville smiled with the specific smile of someone who is pleased to have caused a genuine laugh. Outside the window, the countryside moved south. They arrived at King's Cross in the late afternoon, the platform loud and warm and crowded with returning families. Harry moved through the crowd with his trunk and his Eternals, James and Lily close, the way they always were in public spaces even though they were invisible to everyone but Harry, and found Hermione's parents first, who looked like Hermione with slightly less urgent energy, and then the enormous red architecture of the Weasley family, which occupied a significant portion of the platform with the cheerful confidence of a family that has never seen a reason to take up less space than they need. He found Neville last, on the edge of the platform, Augusta Longbottom standing beside him with the posture of a woman who has decided to hold the world to a high standard and has been enforcing this decision for decades. She was looking at Harry before he'd quite gotten there. He stopped in front of her. She was taller than he expected, or rather, she felt taller, because she had the quality of someone who is exactly as large as they need to be for every situation they enter. "Lord Potter," Augusta said. She said it without irony and without the particular adult condescension that Harry had learned to identify and brace against. She said it as a title she respected. "Lady Longbottom," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. "You knew Doria," she said. "Not a question." "I know her," Harry said. Augusta's expression didn't change, but her eyes went through something complicated, the kind of complicated that happens when a thing you'd filed under impossible rearranges itself under apparently not. "She was my dearest friend," she said. "For 30 years. "I know," Harry said. "She speaks of you often." Augusta Longbottom was not a woman who showed emotion publicly. She had Neville's same quality of containing things carefully, or rather, Neville had hers. But something moved in her face just then that she didn't quite suppress, and she said, "Tell her," she stopped. "Tell her I remember the garden at Greystone. She'll know what it means." "I'll tell her," Harry said. Augusta straightened already considerable straightness into something even more precise, the posture of someone making a decision. "My grandson tells me you're worth something," she said. "I hope so," Harry said. "He doesn't say that lightly." "I know," Harry said. He looked at Neville, who was watching this exchange with the expression of someone who would very much like to say something but is wisely staying out of it. "He's worth considerably more than he currently thinks he is. He'll figure that out." Neville made a quiet sound. Augusta looked at Harry for another long moment. Then she did something Harry hadn't expected, she extended her hand. Not the automatic social hand extension that adults sometimes offered children. The actual kind, the pure kind, the kind that means "I see you." Harry shook it. "Come for tea this summer," Augusta said. "The Longbottom estate. 3rd week of August." "I'll be there," Harry said. She took Neville's shoulder and turned him toward the platform exit, and Neville looked back at Harry over his shoulder and mouthed something that might have been sorry or thank you or possibly both. Vernon was at the barrier. He stood with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man attending something he has resigned himself to and is managing with what dignity he can salvage, which for Vernon meant a very straight back and a very determinately neutral face. He saw Harry coming through the barrier and his eyes moved, instinctively, reflexively, to the space around Harry, looking for something he couldn't name and had been looking for without knowing it for 10 years. Harry stopped in front of him. He was, here, now, in this moment, just a boy with a trunk and an owl and a year's worth of things that had happened. He was also Lord Potter and Shadow Monarch and Master of the Deathly Hallows, and all of those things existed simultaneously without contradiction, the way a person can be many things at once. "Uncle Vernon," he said. "Boy," Vernon said. "Old habit." He caught himself and something crossed his face, the awareness of having said the wrong thing and the further awareness that he didn't entirely understand why it was the wrong thing except that the boy was looking at him and the looking was doing what it always did. "Harry," he corrected. "Thank you for coming," Harry said. He meant it. Vernon being here at all, after everything, was a choice, and he gave it the acknowledgement it deserved. Vernon's jaw worked. He was a man with very few tools for situations that exceeded his experience, and Harry exceeded his experience in every possible direction, and what was left when you exceeded someone's tools for managing you was, just the person. Just Vernon Dursley, standing on a platform, picking up a child who was more than anyone had told him about. "Your aunt made dinner," Vernon said. "Good," Harry said. "I'm hungry." They walked to the car. In the shadow of the station roof, James walked beside Harry and didn't say anything, which was its own kind of language. Harry thought about the summer. About the Longbottom visit. About the Horcruxes and the research and the things that were still to come. About Dumbledore and his partnership of honesty. About Snape and the complicated thing that was complicated but wasn't finished. About Voldemort, contained in the dark, looking for a way back into the light. He thought about all of it, and it was a large thing to carry, and he was 11 years old. But his family was with him, was always with him, woven into every shadow he walked through, and his friends were alive and real and the work was clear even when it was hard, and the shadow domain stretched in every direction as far as he could reach, which was very far indeed. The car moved through London. Outside the window the city went about its evening, ordinary, enormous, full of ordinary people having ordinary lives in streets full of shadows that Harry felt the way you feel your own heartbeat, constant, present, completely natural. At the house, Petunia had made a proper dinner. She'd set the table with 4 places, which she hadn't done before, not 4, always 3, always the unstated message of one person being present but not quite there. Harry sat down and looked at his plate and looked at Petunia, who was not looking at him, who was concentrated on the business of serving the meal with the precision of someone trying not to show that they've done something intentional. "It looks good," Harry said. Petunia set down the serving dish. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. "It'll get cold," she said, which was the most Petunia possible response to his observation, and which he accepted as the thing it was. He ate. The food was good. Vernon talked about something at work. Dudley talked about his summer plans. It was the most ordinary dinner in one of the most ordinary houses on one of the most ordinary streets in England. In the dining room's shadows, Lily sat at the table's empty 4th chair and watched her son eat a real dinner with a full plate and didn't say anything, but the shadow domain was warm in the way it went warm when she was happy. Harry felt it and said nothing and ate his dinner. That night, in the cupboard, he still used it, he preferred it, the compact dark of it was comfortable in a way the larger bedroom had never been. Harry sat with his back against the wall and the Elder Wand across his knees and the shadow hall open around him, all 22 Eternals present. He looked at them. This army that was also a family, this family that was also a court, this impossible thing he'd built across 10 years in the shadows of a life that wasn't supposed to contain anything like them. James, who had died protecting his family and had come back to spend 10 years watching his son become something neither of them had adequate language for. Lily, who had died for love and had come back into the world made of something fiercer and quieter than she'd been before. Charles and Doria, the general and the advisor, steady and brilliant and utterly committed. Fleamont and Euphemia, warm and capable and still completely themselves. Ignotus, ancient and deep and patient with the patience of someone who has been waiting across centuries for this moment and doesn't begrudge the wait. Pericles, the duelist, always moving, always restless even in death. Aldrich, who took notes on everything including being dead and had filled 3 shadow space volumes with observations about the experience. All of them. Every last one. And in the living world, Hermione, who was probably reading right now, somewhere in her parents' house, making notes on Horcrux theory with the intensity of someone who has found a problem worth solving. Neville, who was probably sitting in the Longbottom garden with Trevor and the winter-blooming plant and thinking, quietly, in the way Neville thought, about who he was becoming. Ron, who was probably at the Burrow surrounded by brothers and noise and the warmth of a family that filled every room it entered, absolutely certain that the world was going to be interesting. "There are 6 Horcruxes," Harry said. The Shadow Hall listened. "And he's contained, but not forever. He'll find a way back. He always does." He paused. "But every time he comes back, the situation has changed. Every time he expects something and gets something else." He looked at his Eternals. At his parents. "He's never going to stop being afraid of what I am. And he's never going to understand it, because understanding it would require understanding that some things cannot be conquered or possessed or split. Some things can only become." Silence. "The Horcruxes first," Harry said. "One by one. Carefully, quickly, properly." He thought about Hermione's research. About Dumbledore's knowledge. About the Gringotts records he now had full access to. Then his final form, when he returns. Then the fragment in my scar, which will be last because it'll be harmless until the rest of him is handled. He paused. We have time. We use it. We, James said. Harry looked at him. We, he confirmed. James looked back at his son, this boy who had been 15 months old when the world broke, who had grown up in the dark talking to dead people and emerged from it not damaged but different, not broken but built into something the dark had made rather than the dark had made of him. This boy who was 11 and ancient simultaneously, who carried the weight of a crown without stooping. James Potter had died thinking he'd lost everything. He was wrong. He'd gained something he couldn't have imagined when he was living, the chance to know his son. To see him. To stand beside him while he became what he was going to be. All right, James said. He reached out and put his hand on Harry's shoulder, the shadow hand that was real enough for Harry to feel, that had always been real enough for that. What do you need? Harry looked at the sealed door at the bottom of the shadow domain. The enormous patient thing that had been waiting since before he was born, since before his line began, since Ignotus made his bargain with death itself and sealed a door that could only be opened when the right person stood before it. He was the right person. He'd known that for years. He'd been choosing the right moment. He looked at the door. He looked at his army. He looked at his father's hand on his shoulder. Not tonight, he said. James smiled, the full one, the completely real one. Not tonight, he agreed. Harry leaned his head back against the cupboard wall and closed his eyes and felt the shadow domain breathe around him, vast and deep in his, every corner of it, every shadow of England. The old magic that ran under Hogwarts and the new shadows of a London evening and the deep dark where the sealed door waited and the countless souls of the dead who were not his eternals but who existed in his domain with the quiet permanence of things in their right place. He was 11 years old. He was the Shadow Monarch. He was Lord of House Potter, Master of the Deathly Hallows, Sovereign of the boundary between life and death, heir of the oldest magic in the world and son of two people who had loved him enough to die for him and then come back to make sure the job got done. He was Harry. And outside the cupboard under the stairs, the ordinary summer night went about its business, unaware, as the ordinary world usually was, of the things that lived in its shadows. The door at the bottom of everything waited. It had always waited. It could wait a little longer.